So we're gonna go ahead and get things started here. So welcome to day one of building a 2026 budget and financial plan for your green industry business. My name is Joe Policastro, and I'm joined here with Carla Policastro, my wife, and one of the CPAs here as well at Cycle CPA. For those that don't know us, we run a virtual accounting firm, and we specifically serve green industry companies throughout the country. And everything from the bookkeeping to advisory level services and taxes as well. And our goal here, we were discussing, this webinar series and trying to think, okay, how can we get the most amount of value and the most amount of practical advice over to the green industry community here? And we figured no better way than to get some experts, right? Get experts that can join us and dial into specific line items within the budget. So that's really what's going to be happening here these next 2 days. We're going to be joined by different speakers, industry experts, and so definitely bring your notepad and. This is going to be some exciting stuff. And, also I think a big part of this too, the fact that we're live, as a community, utilizing the chat, not only to ask questions, but we also want to know, as we're going through each topic, what is working for everybody, right? In regard to those specific items, because I think collectively, the hundreds of us that are on this call, we probably solved problems within the company or different issues and different things have come up, maybe that others are trying to currently solve, right? So I think if we utilize that chat, and as we're discussing certain topics, if you can mention maybe what has worked well for you, how have you been able to gain better efficiencies or profitability with that specific line item? So please, you utilize that chat. Again, I think that's one of the great things about, being live here. And it's a 2-day event. So, there's going to be different speakers each day. And like I said, I just dropped the link in the comments as well, which has the also just the events in regard to the schedule.
Great.
And, many of these speakers and, they're trusted vendors, that Carla and I know many of them, maybe even mutual clients, right? So, these are all people that we trust, which is a big deal for us as well. We want to make sure everybody is, has access to those same resources and, those same tools and services, that we're seeing that is working for a lot of companies.
I think we wanted to put together, what our budgeting webinar every year. And this is one of the biggest webinars that we have of the year. But Joe and I were thinking, like, how can we use, our network, our team, and really serve the industry well with this webinar? And it's taking a deeper dive and deeper look into different items on profit and loss and how to budget for them, and utilizing the experts to match up with the P&L items. And I think that's what's super exciting of this year is we're taking a deeper dive into those P&L items to really give you guys a good idea, good solid foundation going into building your 2026 budget. Joe and I have been fortunate enough to work with over 400 green industry businesses, and we've been around for about 5 years now. And we love working with the industry, and I'm super excited to be hosting this event alongside Joe.
And it's an interesting thing about the green industry because, I think it's important to remember that, as you're working on different projects and, creating these beautiful places that families and even commercially people can utilize. And um, it's important to understand that the green industry is actually one of the more difficult types of business models when it comes to the financial side of the company, right? So when you combine some of the factors like seasonality, weather risk, right? Weather impacts your company, and how that impacts cash flow. Looking at the changing costs of materials, the fact that it is more of a labor intensive industry, right? And the certain challenges that come along with that. Having to purchase fixed assets, right? When you combine all of these items, I think this is why it's important that you all are here today, right? Because going through all these challenges, the hope is that you create a financial plan where it all becomes worth it, right? It becomes worth it, you generate profit, and then ultimately reach your goal. So I think that this is important to understand, and I think give yourselves credit, right? Because it is not easy, right? I know many other types of businesses do not have to go through a lot of these different items, right? And as I mentioned, really let's really work together, utilize that chat, and let's all collaborate and figure out, okay, how can we all tackle the different challenges as a group and really hit your goals. And here's the schedule for today and tomorrow. And this is something where we really do appreciate everyone that has contributed to this. This is something that, it's not necessarily that, we paid them for this essentially, right? So I think that what is great about this is everybody has come together to share their guidance, share what has worked for them. So I really, really just want to thank everybody who is going to be speaking, and because without them, this event wouldn't be possible. And with that being said, we can get started with the first speaker, and which is a great start to this webinar, right? Because he's really going to kick off in how do you even begin when it comes to planning and budgeting. So it's Fred Haskett, and Fred is a 45-year green industry veteran who has helped scale lawn, landscape, and tree care companies from single truck operations to multi-state enterprises. After founding Green World Lawn and Landscape and holding senior leadership roles with the Brickman Group, Valley Crest, and U.S. Lawns, he now coaches contractors nationwide as a principal partner at True Winds Consulting. And he's also a Trailblazer Award recipient, an active contributor to NALP and Project Evergreen. So really excited for Fred to kick it off. So we'll get that started here now.
Yeah, awesome stuff.
This is Fred Haskett. How are you doing today? I'm the principal partner at True Winds Consulting, and I'm a guest today of Cycle CPA. And I wanted to thank Joe and his team for allowing me to participate in this process. True Winds Consulting is a consulting firm that is entirely focused on the lawn, landscape, and tree care industry. I spent about 43 years in managing operations in the industry. In the last 10 years, I've been doing consulting work. I work with a variety of different clients. But today we're going to talk about the annual business plan. So stop guessing and start growing. Now, those of you who have been in business for a long time find that, we're all running as fast as we can, and sometimes it feels like we're just keeping in place with that because it's a hard slog with that. And, as the business grows and becomes more complicated, you feel sometimes like you're not getting anywhere. The tail's kind of wagging the dog. I think Ben Franklin kind of said it best. If you're failing to plan, that you're planning to fail. It really is much more effective if you have a really good business plan in place. Now, business planning is a process. First you're creating a vision of where you want to go, how you want to end up. Do you see yourself there? It's a process of aligning your people and your processes and systems so you're all on the same page. You're all in a boat rowing in the same direction. And as part of that process, when you bring those two things together, you're developing the steps and the goals toward getting you where you want to go. Now, unfortunately, and I'm sorry to say this, most organizations don't really have a plan. They just go at it, they do rinse and repeat, and they're working very hard. But if you don't have a plan, you're not working very smart. And it's a really steep hill to climb that. I know a lot of on their financial reports, you're looking at your P&L, looking at your balance sheet. I hope you're looking at your balance sheet. But these are trailing indicators. They tell you what happened in the past. If you have an annual business plan, you can see ahead of you. You can see into the future with that. It's just part of having a roadmap in front of you. It'll help you get to the next level. And every single one of my clients, almost everybody I know in this industry, that's the recurring theme. We're all trying to get to the next level. Now, business planning answers three primary questions. Where are we at right now? What's our current reality? Where do we want to be? What are our goals? And then building an action plan to get from here to there. It's with that. It really is as simple and fundamental as that with that. Now, you just can't put a clean piece of paper down and start working on this. There is a little bit of homework with this process. So let's talk about what you need to do to prepare to plan. There's 3 steps that we want to go through in gathering the information required to do a good plan. 1, know your people. I've always done a process, and I do it early in the 3rd quarter after we're through the rush or through the mid-season. And I ask all my senior leaders and managers to fill out a form with 6 questions. And you want to ask people to do this in writing. And these are kind of deep dive questions. What am I supposed to be doing? What are the standards that are expected of me? How does my performance match those standards, those goals? What do I need to do or learn to improve? What can I expect if I'm successful? What happens if I'm not? So, you can really get some really good information and get a really good window into where you're at and what you're doing. Now, the second part's know your clients. Survey them. You should be doing this at least, at minimum, once a year. You should be doing it a little more frequently than that, but at minimum once a year. You want to ask them how you're doing. What is their level of satisfaction? What could you do to improve your service level? And if you're asking these questions, you're going to find a lot of people may be happy. You're going to find some unhappy people. Those are what you're looking for because they're going to help you identify the gaps or the flaws in your system, the holes in your armor with that. And when you're doing this process, if you are doing it and are responsive with the process, your clients are going to know that you're actively listening and that you actually care about what's going on. It gives you an opportunity to really improve your business. The 3, know your business. Understand what size you are, what makeup you are. There's kind of 5 levels of maturity that most small and mid-sized businesses fall into along the way. So let's talk about those. First is existence. You founded the company, you're out there, you own your own business. You may have 1 to 3 crews, but as an owner, you're doing everything. You're wearing all the hats, you're doing the sales, you're doing scheduling and routing. It's very likely early on in existence that you're out in the field doing the work with the folks. There's not a lot of formal planning or systems in place. We're just going at it every single day as hard as we can. Next mode, you start moving into survival. You might be at the 500,000, 750,000 level. Organization's still pretty basic. You really haven't done a good job of hiring anybody yet. You're still on your own. You're still pretty reliant on yourself at this point in time. You might be doing a little bit of cash forecasting, but there's not a whole lot of planning that goes on at this phase just because who has time for it? Now, you can start to make time for it if you're disciplined at this point. So again, now you got past the million mark. You're 1,200,000, you're 1,500,000. Now we have been successful in building a business. A baseline business now exists here. It's grown large enough to start developing actual functional managers in the system who can help you. The beginning ones are production managers, followed by account managers, those kind of things, because they're out there, they're helping you manage the crews, managing the things in the field, and ultimately managing sales and client relationships. So it's the beginning of the process here of really having a business that's functioning. You've got financial, marketing, and production systems are starting to be in place. And generally, we start to see operational budgets and a budgeting process show up at this place. At least I hope so, with those kind of things. Now, stage 5. This is where you start to take off. You're somewhere between the 2 and 3 million phase in our industry. The organization is starting to departmentalize. We have production departments starting to come into fray. Administration is becoming a bit of a department at this point. That gets a little more complex a little later down the road. Your systems are starting to be in place and more refined. That they're more structured with that. And again, some operational planning is being done, goal setting, things of that nature showing up, and then leading into a budgeting process. At this point, still, the owner is the dominant presence in the organization. They set the tone. They're there, day in and day out, but they actually can get a day off and go on vacation at this stage a little bit more without coming back to a mess on their hands. So now let's phase 5, resource maturity. It's a mature business now. I see companies that start to be able to define as this in the 5, 7, $10 million range in our industry. You have some size advantage. You have some financial resources, and you've developed some managerial talent on your team. You're starting to departmentalize the back of the house operations. Administrative is now departmentalizing into HR, payroll, things of that nature. You've got a fleet management or a senior mechanic in place who's managing those kind of things. So the company's starting to mature, and it's becoming a force in its marketplace based on the success it's had. It's a known company with a reputation. So now, once you understand where you're at, it'll help you understand what you need to do to put some plans in place. So it's time to plan. You start with an annual business plan. It's an operating plan with a 12-month horizon. We're not doing strategic planning at this point. We're not doing 3 to 5 year plans. You want to make sure that you are able to put in a 1-year plan that you can execute at the beginning of this process with that. And if you have a great business plan, it will help you significantly make decisions, achieve your goals, and guide you along the way. It will get you to the next level. And all of my clients, almost everybody I know in this business for 5 decades now, everybody's trying to get to the next level. So another thing, having a plan gives you a tool to communicate what's going on with your people and being able to measure along the way and see how we're doing. It helps you focus both the team and yourself and the company on the direction we're going in and how to get there and how to achieve our success along the way. So again, remember, business planning answers 3 questions. Where are we at? Where do we want to go? And how are we going to get there? So first part, establish your current reality. Where are you at? What's your here right now with that? Where are we at, good or bad, in each of the areas of our business with that? Production, admin, sales, all of those kind of things. What's working, what's not working. Identify where we're at right now with that. Now, You really need to be brutally honest here. You don't do yourself any favors by fudging anything or putting down your marketing aspirations here, because you're trying to get somewhere with this process. And I found over time, I run into a few owners and leadership teams that were kind of delusional about thinking they were a whole lot better than they really were, because they really didn't do a brutally honest analytical. Do yourself a favor. Don't fudge these things. Okay. Now, step 2, where do we want to go? Setting our goals, establishing what our goals are. There's big ones like what's our growth plan and goal for next year? What's our gross margin and net profit goals in that regard? We want to find out where the big picture items are when we're setting the goals. And we're looking again, what, when, and who. What are we going to become? When will it happen with timelines? And who's going to participate in this process to make this happen? Okay, so you're asking a lot of questions here. Do yourself a favor, be specific, document this process, write it down, because this is the model you will use to drive decisions that you're going to make as you move along the process. As we look at goals, there's lots of different types of goals. Strategic goals, supporting high-level goals, supporting goals, and tactics. And this pyramid kind of illustrates some of those things. So there's a whole myriad of goals that support and drive toward the major strategic goals with that. Now, again, when you're looking at the major strategic goals, make sure that they're smart, simple, and few. Do not try to take on too many strategic goals in an annual plan. If you're trying to pursue too many goals, it can be as bad as not getting any of them. Companies that I see that have 7, 8, 9 major strategic initiatives for a single year very seldom achieve any of them. So keep it simple. Maybe 3, maybe 5 at the absolute most. But if you have 5, I would be saying is that too many? Because it might be. All right, now we know where we're at, and we've set some ideas about where we're going. Now we got to build the roadmap. We got to build the action plan to get where we want to go. I think Tom Landry kind of had a very nice comment here. He's a very successful football coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Setting a goal is not the main thing. Deciding how you will go about achieving it and staying with that plan, that's the most important part. This is also the hardest part of business planning. Once you've established where you're at and where you want to go, now you have to build that plan to get there. And it has to be measurable. And Peter Drucker said it best, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And believe me, I've discovered the hard way, this is true. Now, you always use for every single goal, you use the SMART test. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? Is it relevant to what we're doing? And is it time-based? There's got to be a starting time, a midpoint, and an ending time for each one. If you build a goal and it doesn't pass this test, it's not a goal, and you probably won't achieve it. So this is a testing thing to make sure that every goal that you set has these 5 functions with it. If it is, you got a pretty good chance of achieving it. Now, always have your people involved in this. As you mature and grow as a business, you're going to have more and more people working for you and in leadership positions. They know what's going on out there. They probably know more than you do with that. And you have to acknowledge that sometimes. So get them involved early in this process. Don't wait. Don't create your plan and hope they're going to execute it. Believe me, I've tried that. It does not work. You want to have them as part of building the plan and helping make the plan better, and they will make it better. And then if you've done the plan together, they have as much ownership as you do. Then it becomes our plan, and it has a chance of getting done. Because we're establishing the who, the what, and the why. Who will champion these things? What will the steps and metrics be to measure along the way to make sure we're in the right track? And making sure that it does fit the overarching strategic plan that we've laid out. That's the why. The who, the what, and the why. So this is a way that you get there and you can have a very good functional plan that will be successful. Don't be these folks. This is so true and so sad. Few people have any next. They live from hand to mouth without a plan, and they're always at the end of their line. And people like that. Sometimes you're looking in the mirror, you might be that person too. Well, don't be. This is a simple system. It will work for you. You'll use it for annual planning. You can even adapt it as you learn how to use it down to monthly and quarterly plans. It's not complex and it does work. I know it. That. So 2026 is here. No plan's perfect. You'll never create a perfect plan. But it's even worse. The biggest mistake of all is to have no plan. No plan, no way. So get busy planning out there. And I want to say thanks again to Cycle CPA, to Joe and his team. They're putting on a marvelous event here for you, and I hope you stay through the whole event. And then again, reaching out to me, here's my email, my website, and my phone. This is what I do. Many, many of my clients are also clients of Cycle CPA, and they work very much together. All right. Thank you very much. Goodbye and good luck.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Fred. That was, again, a great way to start the webinar series, because I think as much as we hear the word budgeting and planning a lot, oftentimes you don't even set time aside for it, right? The day-to-day could get so busy. So I think that that's just a great piece of advice in itself, right? Just make sure that you're being proactive and even having your team involved within that plan, because as Fred mentioned, they might know a lot more than you know in regard to, especially as they get into some of the specific items, because they're the ones that are operating in the day-to-day. So involve your team. And I think it was also great. Fred had mentioned, really dial it down to, what are some of those core goals within your company? It could get very cloudy if you involve too many things within some of your planning and goals. And I think really trying to get into the core of, okay, what are the things that are really going to drive the company forward? And then ultimately taking action based on that. So I did drop the link for True Winds Consulting within the chat as well. So Fred, I just want to thank you again. That was phenomenal stuff. And this next speaker, is going to get, so now we're going to start to get granular into certain items. And James Reed is going to join us, and James Reed is going to cover facility space considerations and scaling to multiple locations. And James runs a very impressive company. He's really found a phenomenal way to systematize and scale a hardscape business, right? Which in itself is, when it comes to more specialized, people helping out on the projects, and even I know he operates both in multiple different states, but I know some locations are in the Northeast, and dealing with the seasonality and all the other factors that go along with that. And so James is really going to dial into that specific line item. And so he's the founder of Affordable Patio, one of the fastest scaling outdoor living and hardscape companies in the country, now operating in multiple states. He also leads Patio SEO, a digital marketing agency for contractors. And he also created Xmas Mentor, a rapidly growing Christmas light training program. James has helped hundreds of contractors improve lead flow, strengthen their sales systems, and create predictable revenue throughout the year. So again, super excited to have James join us here. We'll let him get started.
Hey guys, how are you? My name is James Reed from AffordablePatio.com and Patio SEO. I just want to say thank you so much to Joe and Carla from Cycle CPA for putting me on, and all the info and all the great education they always give me. One of the topics they wanted me to talk about was having multiple locations with rent, overhead, and properties, and how we figure it all out and distribute it. So it was a great topic because we're only 2 years into having other locations across the states. but we're figuring it out how some things work different in some other areas. So for example, here on Long Island in Bohemia, we have our main headquarters is what I'm filming in right now. So we have a 4,000 square foot shop with a 1,000 square foot office, 2 bathrooms. We have our project managers here, our office manager is here, and our full video team with mechanics in the shop. And this is where all the guys meet in the morning. Our location here is $4,000 a month, which inquires all that stuff, including a side yard and a parking lot. It's not a storefront. It's not for any residential, just really for all of us. So what we have is our location in Florida, which is $220 a month, which is around three parking spots in a dirt yard. We park our trucks, our trailers, and some leftover materials here or there that's closer to this set of jobs. Then we also rent another yard that's around 30-40 minutes away that we call it like our material yard, which is around $300. So we're paying collectively $500. Our material yard, something we didn't know from our first location to our second location to our third location, is they sell it by the pallet. So we noticed that if we needed one layer or a couple of pieces of pavers, we actually needed a whole entire pallet. So we noticed that our first yard of just for trucks and the trailers wasn't going to be efficient enough, because on certain jobs we need to order another whole pallet. So we need to have our own inventory that we could pull from, and also have an accessibility place to hold our rebar, forms, extra pallets, just anything like that, because our first location that we still have now is more accessible just for the trucks. We picked that location close to where our employees are, so it's easier. Where our other yard that I mentioned about was 30-40 minutes away, and it's not where a lot of our work is. So we kind of wanted to strategically plan that. Then in Long Island, we have 2 locations, which is Suffolk and Nassau. Nassau is closer to New York City, so if any of you guys can understand, the traffic is crazy. So the reason we have another location there is because sometimes with traffic, it might take over an hour or so to get to a job each way. If our guys are working around 7 hours, I can't have them be traveling for over 2. So what we did in our Nassau location is we actually have a storage unit, and at the storage unit we have one parking lot spot for the dump trailer. Our main hub is here in Suffolk County, but what we do in that other parking spot and storage unit is just additional tools, supplies, signs. Our dump trailer stays there. So it's a central location that makes it easier in accessibility. Obviously, some of the guys will come back to the shop. The project managers come back to the shop. If trucks need to get fixed, it's just one central hub that we've noticed that if that could save an hour or 2 every single week, you're talking about almost 10 hours a month that we could be saving with productivity and making it easier. What we also did is we're also able to use some of these yards as a Google My Business location, which will help at ranking. We own Patio SEO, which is our marketing company, which we do for landscapers and contractors like yourselves, but it's our in-house that we've grown our companies. So we've noticed that able to use these locations for another Google My Business location will help with the 3-pack and showing up to your potential client. So then our location in New Hampshire, the guy there, we actually, because New Hampshire has more property, works out that we actually leave all our equipment at our employee's house, and we pay him rent because he has a couple of acres and it's very common in that location. So, and then this is the best part that people don't know and people love this info. One of our main employees, Evo, who is our head of operations for our marketing company, that used to be his desk right there, actually for the company sacrificed and moved back to Ecuador. So a lot of people don't know this. We actually have a 2,000 square foot office in Ecuador where we have some of our marketing employees, some of our girls in the office that are helping with the call center. And that helps because that's only $400 a month. And it gives you it gives you a location that all the employees can meet to work together. We're not a huge fan of virtual just because we're not sure if people are working or what they're doing. And also having the culture and the charisma of everyone working together, pushing forward and everyone celebrating their wins, going to lunch was super beneficial. I still don't have it all figured out, but what I'm going to be trying to do is actually seeing what is the best options. Quick little story that I have, our Florida location, we purchased a used truck. It was around $17,000 for this used truck, which in our Suffolk and Nassau location, we purchased used trucks because we have the shop that we could fix, maintain, take care of everything. But what we noticed was we bought the truck for $17,000 in Florida. We do not have any locations, or we don't know any relationships or mechanics down there. So we dropped it off at a local mechanic place. They repaired it. It broke again in a month. They repaired it, broke again in a month, and then they repaired it. So in 1 year, we spent $15,000 on repairs. So we spent 17 plus 15, and then another $5,000 just in rental. So we spent $37,000 in 1 year on this truck with the purchase, the rentals, and repairs. And then we just heard last week that the truck broke down again and it may need a new motor. So I'm learning from my mistakes that, wow, one location is different from another. But I'm so accustomed to our Suffolk County location on Long Island with a shop, with mechanics and relationships that I have, that model was going to work there, and it didn't work there. And we had to suffer. We had to put it on a flatbed, ship the truck back up here, and have my shop here take care of it. Because I was spread a little thin while these trucks were breaking down, and I didn't do the research with that Ford F-350 with that gas motor, who's a good mechanic that will understand it. My guys just dropped it off because we didn't have a system or a process that could be duplicated because we have a shop here. So it was easier for, if there was a service call on the side of the road, our mechanics would take one of our trucks, go and repair it, and it would be up and running. Or what we would also do is have our mechanics here bring another truck, let the guys jump in that truck, continue working while he repaired it, and then bring it back here and finalize it. So over the last 2 or 3 years now that we've been building multiple locations, and I'm excited for 2026 to try to get another 1 or 2 locations up and running, how much it's different in each location, and actually seeing pain points or variables that might be happening that we need to adjust per location. So in the future, I'm not looking to have massive shops and duplicating this service that we have here unless it gets to a certain area that's something that's potential. But I'm learning through this process what is the best, the pros, the cons, and things that might need to get adjusted or changed when it comes to having properties, yard spaces, shops, and offices, and seeing what's the most productive. In another year or 2, I think I'll be able to really figure out our real model, exactly what we're doing and how we're going to duplicate it. I'm so excited that I got to meet all you guys, talk about this service. If you guys have any questions ever about the scaling, the marketing, systems and processes, these are things that we do really, really well, still learning every day. And I'd love to help you guys in any way I can. Thank you so much. Good?
You had like 30 seconds left. That's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
Awesome stuff. And it's great to hear from someone that's in it and going through these challenges, right? And I think it was a great point too, James, how you mentioned how each location is going to have its unique challenges, right? And I think it's also an interesting thing to think about, even as you all think about your current facility space. What are those, or what part of your current facility would break first if you doubled your revenue, right? And trying to be proactive and figure out, okay, how can I plan ahead, so that it actually doesn't become a bottleneck for my company. And I think that's a lot of aspects of your company. But when it comes to facility space, also basing it on what is going to fit into your budget. So phenomenal points, James. Really appreciate you coming on. I also added some of his resources in the comments as well. Everything from patio, SEO. He also has the Christmas light resources, and he runs a phenomenal division with that. Does a lot of Christmas light business, and I know especially throughout Long Island. But it's great stuff there. So definitely check that out. It's great to be able to add something like Christmas lights to help with some of the seasonality. And then also check out his website. I also dropped it there in the comments. Like I said before, James had spoke. It's really impressive what he's built, and I think you can even see by the website as well how he facilitates the services, and even kind of breaks down the within his website how you can almost design and kind of build and price out the job right on the website. So he's built out a phenomenal company and systems, and definitely follow him on Instagram as well. Thanks again, James, for joining us. Our next speaker is someone who has a lot of experience in the industry. And, I think some of you might be looking, maybe it's next year, maybe it's, maybe it's the year after, right? But are you considering exiting your business, right? Are you thinking about a potential succession plan? I really, Carl and I really felt it would be really beneficial to have someone join us here today and share their perspective in regard to what should be done if you are looking to exit your company, especially more from a budgeting perspective, right? What should you expect on that side of things? So we're going to have for our next speaker, Phil Harwood, join us. I'm sorry, that's actually our next speaker. I'm sorry about that mix up there. As you can tell, I'm not a professional speaker myself. Our next speaker is another industry titan, actually, Brad Stevenson, and he's going to share some of the more common mistakes when it comes to budgeting. Now, Brad Stevenson is the CEO of Newcastle Lawn and Landscape, where he has the bold goal of reaching 50 million revenue within the next decade. He's a landscaper advisor and coaches many small business owners on leadership, culture, and organizational development. So really want to thank him for joining us here today, Brad. And we'll dive into it.
Good morning, everybody. It's Brad Stevenson here from Newcastle Lawn and Landscape. Thank you, Cycle CPA, for inviting me to go over budgeting and some of the common mistakes that I usually see when I'm doing some advising work. I'm working with Landscaper as well, but I just want to go over some of the tips and tricks that I've seen over the years and I've used myself, but also, what are some of the pitfalls that we can easily fall into? You should be thinking about 2026 right now. And if you're not, start. But my whole goal, again, is to get through some of this budgeting, some of the higher level stuff. But I will be using a screen share and sharing a budget I created for this webinar through LMN Budget. And you don't have to use LMN. We use LMN. It's a very easy budgeting tool. I'll show you how it works as well as I go through. But if you have a spreadsheet, piece of paper, whatever, I want to go over some of the things that you want to make sure you take into account. So first off, I want to talk a little bit about field labor. I think that's the biggest thing that we're all thinking about, right? Is field labor, and what are the costs associated with it, and what are some things we usually miss? So if you can see on my screen here, this is the LMN budget again, but this is the field labor side of things and what we're looking to do this year. And it's really important to understand, how many hours you're actually going to work with the crews. And the way LMN has it set up, it's pretty slick. And we've been using this since 2016. We turned our company around in 2016 once we started budgeting. So budgeting is so important. And it's really to forecast where you're going to end up. And I'm just going to go through this a little bit. But how many hours do you work throughout the year? How many people? Here I have 3 crew members and 1 foreman, right? And the total regular hours they're going to work, each crew member, each foreman, they're going to work 1,280 hours with 320 hours of overtime, with the average wage for the crew members 21, foreman 25. Very high level. It gives you the total hours worked. That means paid hours, not budgeted. We'll go over that a little bit. But 6,400 hours for this mowing budget that I set up for $460,000 in revenue. Hopefully this could resonate with people. I didn't want to go too big or too small, kind of, what we're shooting for here, 460. And the labor we have right now, again, it's 3 crew members, 1 foreman at a 16% labor burden. Labor burden is all your taxes, your benefits, that sort of thing is your labor burden. You got to make sure you have a percentage on that. So if you're not using LMN, make sure you're not just taking the hourly rate and not adding anything to it, because there's payroll, taxes, and everything you have to pay. For us, it's about 16% is what we put in there. But for every company, it's going to be different. So do not take these numbers and just plug them into your own budget. But there should be some type of labor burden that you're putting in for your employees. So the average cost for your employee is not $21. It's $21 plus 16%. That's your cost, or that's our cost. And then you start figuring out profitability beyond there. But really understanding your capacity. And then as you set up a budget, you also want to, like next year, you're going to set up a budget for 2026, and you're going to want to look at actual versus budgeted. So you want to have this data coming in. How many hours are you actually working? Are you recouping enough for your taxes in order to make any changes throughout the year is really important. But this is the first thing that I think people miss is the actual labor hours versus budgeted, and what's your inefficiency rate, right? So how inefficient are you? And all those inefficiencies are unbillable time. So say you have a mowing route, you got five stops, and you're just tracking the time on the job, and that's it. But you paid the guys out 10 hours, but they only tracked at 6 hours. So that's 4 hours per person that is in drive time or somewhere else that is not getting captured. So you paid for 10, but the budgeted hours for the jobs is only 6. So it's just a way to think about, so your efficiency rate is 60% in that case. That means 40% of your time is not billable time. So you have to account for that, right? Because you're still paying for people to drive. Your customers should be paying as well. And when I go into companies, it's the first thing I look at is efficiency. And it's really easy to point out where you guys aren't capturing or where we're not capturing those hours. It could be even training hours. But what is not getting billed to a job? What is that percentage? And just be truthful to yourself, okay? And that way you know what you need to charge to make up for those hours that aren't billable, because you still have to pay your guys. There's still a cost to your people, so you got to make sure you're charging enough to recoup that. Number one mistake is what I see is inefficiency, unbilled hours. So for us, we'll punch into a payroll system, and then we'll have our operating software, and we'll compare the two as far as how much we were paid for the week, or how much we paid out versus how much we actually did, and that's our inefficiency. And then we have a KPI, a key performance indicator, for each division. For mowing, we want to be at 80% efficient. That means 20% is drive time, shop time, load time, whatever. 20% is, I mean, that's not bad. So I wouldn't expect you to be 95%. Most likely, most people, if you guys haven't budgeted, you're probably 40% inefficient. And that's pretty common, even 50% inefficient, and you just don't know it. And you start thinking about going into the future, how can you reduce that non-billable time so you don't have to charge so much to recoup that? How much time is being wasted, basically, is what it comes down to. So efficiencies is so important to understand pricing. And LMN is pretty slick the way they set up, and this budget's not set up right. But at a 20% inefficiency ratio, we should be charging about $90 an hour in order to recoup that 20%. Now, if you lower this to say 5%, you can see how the dollar per hour, as far as what you have to charge, goes down. And that's the joy of this budget, is it's so user friendly. I have all my supervisors running LMN budgets for their own divisions, so they have their own cost structure and they know what they need to hit and the why behind it, right? So, number one. Next one that usually hits people is the equipment rentals. And I think a lot of people lose this throughout the year. If you're not looking at a P&L, or you're not looking at your costs at the end of the year or even quarterly, as far as how much equipment are you renting, and really, does it make sense to buy something instead of renting it on a regular basis? So you have to look at your averages. But I can tell you, an area that gets lost is rentals. And 2 years ago, we budgeted $100,000, but we actually spent $200,000. So what we needed to do is put an extra line item into our jobs for rentals, which I would suggest doing anyway, to recoup that. So if you're renting a machine, make sure you're charging for your equipment. And that's key, like either in your labor rate or a separate line item, somehow recoup the charge of your equipment, because you got to pay for it, right? It's just like an employee. So you got to make sure you're recouping the dollars for that. And I won't go into the equipment side of LMN, but again, it's slick. It'll give you the ROI per year you need to recoup. And it's over the lifespan of the piece of equipment. But super important to really understand equipment rentals. How much are you renting? Does it make sense to purchase? Because if you look at purchasing, it's now, well, it's a liability, but it can be an asset eventually, and you're paying that off instead of renting something that you'll never own. So just something to think about, common pitfall that happens. One other thing, and I'm just going through this list a little bit. One other thing is subcontractors and markups. Now, for mowing, most people don't use subcontractors, but for our construction, our landscape, trees, there for a while, we were running the dollars that we were paying those subs right through the company without any markup. So we weren't making any money on our subcontractors. And a lot of times, salespeople I've seen, they'll start lowering the markup on subs to get the total dollar of the job sold down, because it's just a subcontractor. The problem is if you're running those dollars, that you're gaining, which is basically just the cost, it's going to screw up your top line number. It's hard to explain. But subcontractors markup, they should be at least 15%. We mark subs up 34%. And that's just because, as far as our gross profit, where we want to be for like construction, in the 30s is where we want to be, gross profit for them. And if we're paying out commission, I want to make sure that, we're making up on the subs. So anyway, we mark 15% to 34% is really what the markup should be. Most markups on subs is 15% across the industry, but you got to mark them up. You can't just run that revenue through the company, because it falsifies your top line. It's not accurate because you're paying that money. It's just going right through your company and to the subs. So when setting up a budget, if you're going to use subcontractors, put your cost in, but what's your markup? to get your true revenue that you're going to be making off of those subcontractors. And any questions you have, feel free to reach out to me. I'm pretty much an open book. I'll try to answer wherever I can, but my guess is with this 2-day seminar, you guys are going to get a lot of information. So again, subcontractors, something that gets missed. Also, one other thing that usually gets missed with budgeting or tracking is repairs and maintenance. And again, we have some repairs here, but if you're not tracking it, you're going to lose. So like, how are you during the year putting things into different categories so you can pull up a P&L and see, how much repairs did we actually do? How many people did we have to bring into, or how much did we have to send out truck-wise to fix a truck? And there was one year we did about 200,000 in truck repairs. So we started asking ourselves, if we're paying 200,000, it's basically mechanic work. If we hired a full-time mechanic, we could lower our costs by 100,000. And that's what we did. We hired a full-time mechanic. So now you don't have any downtime. Now you have a mechanic that can fix stuff on the fly and keep our guys going without sending it out. So you don't have that downtime, but it was all because we tracked our repairs. So you got to forecast, look at what you did this year, and then forecast what you think you're going to do. It depends on how old your fleet is, how old your building is. What are the repairs? What truly are the repairs that you're going to spend money on? In order to make sure that those dollars are in your budget, because you have to recoup that. Those costs get passed to your customers, and a lot of people won't do that, and that's why they don't have any profit, because they're not putting all the dollars. And again, you don't have to use LMN. You can use your own spreadsheet and just get some of these costs in there so you know what you need to charge. Okay, so repairs and maintenance, super important. Insurance, you look at, we talk about labor burden of 16%. You should be, first off, a couple of pitfalls. Paying for insurance of vehicles you got rid of. Done that several times for a couple of years and didn't even realize it. So who's reviewing your fleet? And maybe you only have 2 trucks, whatever, it's fine. You only have 1 truck. Okay. But what does your insurance look like, your auto insurance? But then also, what are your other insurances? And the one that really stands out is workman's comp. And you need to know what code you're under. So there are so many codes, and your broker should be working with you on this. But I can tell you, like for us, for trees, for tree removal, if we have a climber climbing up a tree, he is punched into a separate job for climbing, and we have to pay $30 for every 100 that guy makes. $30 for every $100 that guy makes. It's a lot. So it's important to isolate climbing time, right? So you have the tree climbing. That's probably the highest rate. And then you have a landscape rate. And every state's different, right? But the landscape rate is less, and admin rate is even less. So when you start looking at where are your people categorized, do you have a field person that moved into an admin spot? Now you're still paying the landscape code for them when you could pay whatever half of that. So start really looking at your insurance and how can you reduce those costs. We've done that. We do it every year. And again, people move. So you forget maybe they're out of the field and they move up. So it's important because you're going to get audited on a yearly basis, most likely, and they're going to go back and look at hours worked, and you have to be able to give them that information as far as where did people work. And it's important to keep track of that, but then also budget it for the future. Like, how many people are you going to have in admin? And that goes to overhead, right? So overhead expenses, you have your rent, office supplies. This is very small, by the way. For us, it's a huge line. And what I do is I put the account ID, it matches our P&L. So I can cross-reference, plus I throw this into QuickBooks our budget so I can look budget to actual on percentages. But what are your overhead expenses? Again, office supply, rent. And this is another thing that really can kill a company. Like, did you just go out and get a building? Did you first buy a building that maybe you're not ready for? Are you leasing a building that's too expensive? And this is a forecasted of 60,000 a year is what the forecast is. It's $5,000 a month. But as you can tell here with our profit and loss, we're negative 4.3 right now with our overhead. So this is what I'll do as I'm budgeting. I'm going through and just saying, okay, well, say we move to a building that's 30,000 a year. What is that? Okay, well, that bumps our net profit up to 2.2%. And it's just a way to start massaging this budget as you're looking into the future, 2026 and beyond. What are the moves you have to make? And you have to, this time of year, you have to start planning that. Back in the day, we used to take breaks in the wintertime and it just snow removal, but it was just like a party. That doesn't happen anymore. And I can tell you, the more you get into budgeting and understanding your numbers with help from other people, myself, whatever, with help, it can change your whole company around. Because my guess is you're probably not charging enough because you're not putting all the costs that you truly have in the business. So important to understand overhead wages as well. How much are you paying yourself? Are you just taking out distributions? Do you have a living wage? Right here, I have admin staff at $45,000 a year. I have owner salary at $100,000. Again, lowering that labor burden here. I don't know what yours is going to be at, but again, a workman's comp for admin staff, if you're not out in the field producing work, that's what overhead is. It's going to be less. The risk isn't there for the insurance company. So how can you adjust that? Can I hire an admin staff? Well, at 2.2%, I don't think I can. So I'm going to zero that out. Okay, now we're at 12.8. That's more doable. That's net profit at the end of the year. We're going to be at 12.8. You should be shooting for 10%. If you're an owner operator, you're going to be higher because it's the most efficient company you could ever have. Owner operator is out working in the field. It's really, really efficient. So your profit should be more than 10%. But again, I'm not telling you what to do on that. But just really understanding where your costs are so important. And really, again, going back to the LMN budget, just understanding like renewals, like going out for next year. How do you know what you need to charge? Well, that's why I set up budgets 2 months ago to understand what do we need to charge for each department and what does our gross profit as a company need to be in order to make all this happen. So it's a lot. I know that, but the more that you treat your business like a business, listen, I was in the field without surgeries and without breaking my body down. I probably wouldn't be in an office, but I'm like, well, if I'm in an office, I'm going to start really learning this and understanding how to run a landscape company like a business. That's important because you are a business and you're a very important business. So understanding your costs, understanding your numbers, and setting up that forecast. And I set up a 3-year, 10-year forecast as well for the company. But how can you start looking at that vision out in the future and how you can look at what your cost structure is so you know what you need to bring in the door, what you need to charge. Okay. So hopefully this was helpful. Those are the main things I wanted to go over. I think the small tools is one other thing that really gets away from people if you're not tracking it. Going to Home Depot, buying a battery set, buying shovels, buying rakes. Well, who's tracking all that? That can get out of hand as well. But again, forecasting what that's going to be in a budget on a spreadsheet somehow, some way that will match up to your P&L if you're running QuickBooks or any other accounting software, or you're using Cycle CPA to help you. You have to have some type of accounting software, but then how are you looking budgeted to actual on at least a quarterly basis? So guys, hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. And, I hope I was able to at least speak some sense into you to charge what you need to charge. You're worth too much, but you have to know what your expenses are. So anyway, have a great day and keep on pushing. And here's to a great 2026.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you, Brad. That was a lot of really, really neat practical insight in regard to the whole budgeting process. Appreciate you giving us a look kind of behind the hood there. Super, super helpful. Thank you, Brad. And
a great presentation. Awesome takeaways.
Yeah. And we have some other great speakers left for today. And before we dive into a lot of that, Carla and I wanted to share some key points as well in regard to building out a sales forecast, also looking into certain benchmarks and other details when it comes to the whole budget process. And in regard to revenue goals, and I should say, even looking at the green industry and the revenue growth that we've seen based on the benchmark. So as we mentioned before, we work with over 400 companies in the green industry, and we kind of compile that data. And that's part of how, what we show in regard to reporting with our clients is we can show your profit and loss versus how the other companies are doing, right? And as part of that, looking at the revenue growth. So the companies that do a lot of the mixed, whether they do install, tree services, maintenance, so they don't provide more than 75% of any given service line. They saw revenue growth of around 9.65%. Installation-based companies were around 15.8%, and reoccurring-based companies and kind of like the less material-intensive companies, close around 9.91%. And it's important to understand where that industry median is when it comes to revenue growth, because ultimately, if you're above that metric, if you're growing faster than the average company, then there's going to be more investments into the company, right? Your cash flow might not be as good as companies that aren't growing as quick. At the same time, if you're growing slower than industry average, I think that's even more of a reason to really dial into profitability, right? Some consider maybe going into profit mode or really trying to dial into, okay, how can we make sure that the operations are efficient? Dialing into things like route density if it's more of a route-based company. So really kind of looking at these benchmarks. And then even when it comes to, can we build out revenue that is realistic? And Carla, I'm sure you see a lot of different numbers in regard to revenue targets.
Yes, I do. And I think, so one of the items that, not last year, but 2 years ago, we were seeing a lot of companies have unrealistic sales goals. And what happens with that is you're setting up a budget that is unrealistic, because if your revenue number is unrealistic, there's just so many expenses, like Joe said, that is tied to that. And then it doesn't become like a relevant document for you to look at every single month, right? It becomes something that you can't rely on. So being realistic in your budget is, I think, one of the first things that you have to think and ask the question to yourself is like, okay, if the average company in the green industry is growing at almost 10%, but because of my market, because of my name, because of my marketing investment, and my track record, I can grow at 20% next year, then that might be a realistic goal for you. But if your track record was growing at 10% and all of a sudden you want to grow at 40%, and that's how your budget is set, is more looking at, okay, well, how am I going to make that happen? Am I going to change my marketing method? How is my advertisement going to change? Do I have the cash flow to make that happen? How am I going to change my hiring practices because now I'm going to need 4 new crew members, more different sub relationships that I may have to, have in order to make this change. So I think that if you're thinking about what is the revenue growth, and just because your variable costs, the costs that fluctuate as your revenue fluctuates, is tied to that, is super important to start off with a realistic picture.
Yeah, and if you find yourself in July of 2026 and you find that you're behind on your revenue goal, but you didn't update your budget, and in your budget you mentioned, oh, I can spend 4% on rent costs, but you didn't update your budget. Now you might think that you can afford more on that than you realistically can. So it's important to reassess that throughout the year.
Oh yeah. A budget is not, it is, so a budget is not a set it and forget it. And I think that a lot of us look at it that way. And to a certain point, yes, like I'm not saying go ahead and change your budget every month. Like that's not the right way to go about it, because a budget is supposed to be a little bit of a stagnant, numbers that we're looking at, right? But for example, in our meeting cadence, we have it that in June or July, we look at the budget, and now it's the time to reassess and maybe update some numbers in your budget for the rest of the year if something is not looking right, or so that way at least mid-year you have a plan, a revised plan for the rest of the year, and so you get the outcome that you want. So I think a budget revision once or twice during the year, it's really not bad, and it's beneficial. It's beneficial because things happen during the year that you just might not be able to forecast, right? Different events might happen, personal events, business events, whatever it is. And some of it may be favorable, other events may be unfavorable, but that's okay. You still want to update your plan. But I think that, updating the budget numbers every month is not something that you're going to want to do. That's not what we're saying, but definitely revising it once or twice a year.
Yeah. And trying to base it as much on data as possible. And I think the reason why we're talking about revenue, and I think a lot of people think in terms of, yes, profitability is enormously important, right? But building that revenue up allows you to build in a lot of those different expenses, right? So that's why you want to be as accurate as possible with the revenue, because a lot of items are relative to that, right? You're going to look at a lot of your expenses maybe as a percentage of total revenue. So you want to look at your revenue target and base it on actual data. And that's not only financial data. It's non-financial metrics as well. Some might refer to it even as leading indicators. And an example of that is looking at your customer attrition, right? How many customers are leaving your business? Because if 15% of customers or 20% of customers leave your business, and now you're $1 million company, you're actually going to have to, just in order to get to the same $1 million next year, you're going to have to make sure that you get those 15 to 20% of customers just to hit that same revenue goal, right? And that's why it's important to understand that, and I put the example below, right? It's very different, and there's different stages as you, let's say, double a $300,000 company is very different than doubling a $3 million company, right? So think also in terms of rate of growth, right? So if you double a $300,000 company, then you hit 600,000, but that rate of growth is actually $300,000. So then if the next year you want to grow by another 300,000, you're going to get to 900,000, right? And if that system and that rate of growth is working, then you know that is reasonable based on the systems and the processes that you have in the company. But if you want to go from 900,000 to 1.8 million and double the company, there's a big difference when it comes to that rate of growth. You're actually more than quadrupling or 3xing that rate. Now, do you have the recruiting systems in order to support that? Do you have the marketing systems in order to support that? Do you have the operational systems and the training processes, right? So thinking about ultimately what, similar to how we mentioned in regard to facility expense, and if you double your company, what would break first, right? Would you not have room for your office manager or, specific areas of your yard? You think in all aspects of your business, but I think it's really important when you're thinking about that revenue target, be as realistic as possible.
I also want to contribute to the conversation that's going on in the chat about different systems like LMN or Synced Up that you can build a budget and derive your estimates off of that budget, which is a powerful tool. That's what you want to do, is make sure that your estimates are derived after your budget, because then your budget is what becomes your profit and loss and your reality and your financials for the year, right? But a lot of people look at this as a one and done situation. I'm going to implement my budget on Element, Synced Up, whatever CRM that you're using, and that's it. I should be good for the rest of the year, right? No, you're not. You're not going to be good for the rest of the year. I think you've done the first step in order to take control of your financial situation. But the most successful companies that we work with is we're meeting with them monthly to review their budget that they have in Element or Synced Up or whatever other software. And we're saying, okay, well, this is what you budgeted for January. Well, let's plug in your actual numbers on your P&L for January. And what were the differences? Did you do better or worse than we expected you? And why? Why if you did worse, and why if you did better, then why? And it is our job as business owners to know the reason why. Like if we see a difference in numbers, it could be, one of the reasons could be, well, my truck broke down and I needed new equipment to repair it or whatever, or we ran overtime on that job. It's just not quoted correctly for the right amount of hours, and as you go along every month, you have these lessons that you learn, and you make sure that it doesn't keep happening in February, March, or you adjust your budget for them. And then that's how your budget becomes your actual profit and loss. It becomes your reality and you become successful in that. And that's what our most successful companies do, is we have a budget, but we're reviewing the actuals every month. And well, what are the differences? Do we have to go back into LMN and update their numbers for them, right? And I'm not saying that you have to do that with us or our company, but it's something that you as a business owner could do every month after you see your financials, or you could do it with another accountant, whoever it is, your spouse. But it's so important to review these on a monthly basis.
Absolutely. And looking at the P&L is going to give you a lot of great insight. I think also considering a lot of the balance sheet items, and we had brought up before a lot of the challenges that the green industry faces on the financial side. And ultimately what that result is the net cash flow of the industry is typically around 0 to 1% of revenue, which is something I think we really want to improve, right? So does each one of your team members understand what their impact within their role is on the financial health of the company and the cash flow perspective of the company? Making sure that they understand, right? How important is that? Having those conversations, keeping this stuff front of mind, because the team will just assume things, right? And it may not be right. So always remembering to maybe include them in certain conversations. You don't have to tell them your net profit or whatever it is, right? And we're actually going to have Ryan Markowitz share in regard to a bonus plan. That'll be tomorrow. And then even the conversation that we were just having in regard to softwares, Element and Synced Up are great in regard to budgeting, but Mike Callahan is going to dive into software expenses and just that deep dive tomorrow as well. So, hopefully we're going to give even more clarity into that. But in regard to cash flow, again, looking at debt management, also something that's not the most exciting thing and not talked about a lot is managing your accounts receivable and accounts payable, making sure that your customers are paying you. That's going to have an enormous impact. You can be very detailed in your budgeting and focusing so much on your estimating and your processing, but if you're not collecting on progress payments and you don't have a standard process for that, then that's going to limit you more than anything, right? That could be the major bottleneck of your company. So.
Awesome stuff. And one example that I have is we had a business owner that had a mechanic on staff because they just, they're a larger company and have enough equipment and vehicles that needed to be repaired, right? And at that point, it's if you do have a mechanic on staff, you don't want to spend a lot of money on the repairs and maintenance, right? Because that's why you hired a mechanic, is so that you kind of minimize that cost. And so when we were building out the budget for the year, that business owner was very adamant of communicating the repairs and maintenance budget to that mechanic and saying, hey, this is our budget for the year. And if items come up, we need to be creative and very thoughtful and intentional about the tools that we are buying to repair any items that do. So maybe when it comes to sourcing materials, they are shopping online for the best deals or getting more creative with the methods that they're using for repairing certain items, right? So another thing is if you see that you do have a lot of repairs and maintenance items, or you're having to issue refunds because of quality issues to your client, right? Different things like that that you want to hold your team accountable to. And I think somebody mentioned that in the chat too. It's like when you have a budget, you can hold your team accountable to that, or at least you have a direction and where you want to go, and you can spread that message to your team. But you have to have they have to have skin in the game too. And how do they have skin in the game? It's like you tie their pay to it. So perhaps you have quarterly or biannual bonuses that you give out if the staff member meets budgeted hours, right? If their projects come out with a certain quality, if they don't break anything on the job site, or for that quarter, or for those 6 months, then they get a bonus based off of that. And when you set those expectations and that scorecard in front of them, and you put a system in to track all of that, then that's how you get buy-in from your team, because that could mean a road trip for them. That could mean extra groceries, right? Like they may be motivated by that, and it's a way to gamify it too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's it's a big part, especially as you grow a company. And you can have the best plan, right? And Fred Haskett had mentioned just all the different aspects when it comes to the plan and taking action and all the things that go into that. But ultimately, you want to keep a close eye on the certain risks within your company. And you don't want one thing to ruin your whole plan and your whole plan for success for 2026. So it's important, yes, to think about all those exciting things and things that you can add to your company, and all the things that can make your company better. But at the same time too, it's important to always run scenarios through different aspects of your company. What if this person leaves? What if this happens to the company? Trying to really think about what that plan could be, so that if those things happen, instead of it being more of an emotional response or something that totally destroys your company for that year or causes you not to grow as much as you'd like, you already have a system and approach that you can actually handle that and actually succeed even past that. These are the certain things based on risk that you can look into. So client concentration. Are there any customers that make up more than 10% of total revenue of the company? That could be a risk, especially if they leave. Looking at credit risk, right? How much are you relying on certain customers to pay you over certain extended terms and different aspects like that? Liquidity risk, looking at cash flow concerns, both in the short-term and long-term perspectives. Another big thing is, I think a lot of companies want to progress and want to earn more revenue, and oftentimes try to take on larger projects, whether it's on the commercial side, on more maintenance work, or maybe it's more the outdoor living, getting into something where now instead of subbing out a lot of the work, now you're going to handle a lot of it internally, right? Handling those larger jobs equals more risk, right? So you're going to want to make sure that your job costing is dialed in, that your profits are high, because if you didn't hit your profit goals on a $5,000 job, it's probably not going to make or break you. But if you don't hit your goal on a $200,000 job, that's going to have a bigger impact on your company, right? So it makes it even more important to dial into your numbers. Also look at loss leaders, right? As I mentioned before, this is a very people-intensive business. This is something that there's a lot of different stresses, right? And a lot of things that you're having to manage as a business owner. Is it worth breaking even or losing money in an entire division just to be able to sustain your company and maybe be profitable in another division? Or can there be a model that is more equally distributed in regards to profits for each division? And this, again, when it comes to risk, this can help to hedge against different changes in your market. As many of you have seen, those of you that have been around during 2008, and even in recent years, looking at certain installation-based companies in different markets throughout the country, and the ups and downs of that. Building in redundancies, right? If you have some key team members, understanding that, and having a deep understanding of all those roles, making sure that the SOPs are built in, so that if they do leave, we have a system to fill that in, even if you as the owner have to step in for a little bit, but it allows your company to keep moving forward. Also things like building up a cash reserve, right? These are all things that you can do to prepare your company, because oftentimes companies don't reach their goals because it's things like this that happen to them, and then it discourages them, and it even can put you back an entire year, right? Or multiple years, right? So instead of hoping that these things don't happen, almost expect that some of this will happen, right? And think about, how can we adjust? What is that plan that we need to do? Because especially for those of you that have been around for 10 years, 20 years, or even decades in business, the reality is a lot of these things happen. So it's trying to come up with that plan to really tackle it. And also just sharing some general benchmarks as well. So when it comes to direct costs, so everything that is related to the work being performed on the actual project, so not taking into account any overhead or administrative costs, you can see over to the left, the green industry companies that didn't provide more than 75% of any given service line did around 51.77%. And then you can see the installation-based number, recurring-based number. Typically, installation is going to be higher, right, when it comes to direct costs, because you have more materials built into that, right? Now look at your overhead costs, and these are the industry medians up year to date up to the end of November of 2025. This is specifically for companies over $500,000 in sales. it should be relatively similar even for smaller companies as well. But this is just as an example, and just kind of as you think about some of the data within your company. So you can see overhead costs. Companies that do installation-based work, they typically don't have thousands of customers, right? That they're having to manage, and the routes and the different things going on. So overhead's typically a little bit lower with that, whereas reoccurring businesses, maybe more maintenance, lawn care-based companies, we're seeing a little bit higher in regards to the overhead costs there. So again, you can use these benchmarks to kind of help as you're budgeting for next year. And we started the intro for our next speaker before, and phenomenal individual Phil Harwood is going to be going over the financial budgeting from the perspective of succession planning. Phil is a licensed attorney who specializes in helping business owners plan and execute successful company exits. A member of multiple legal associations and a graduate of Michigan State University's executive MBA and marketing programs, Phil brings a rare blend of legal, strategic, and business operational experience. And after retiring early from a successful management career, he founded Tamarisk Business Advisors, LLC, and Tamarisk Legal Advisors, PLC. And now he advises companies all throughout the country in regards to succession planning, legal structure, and just what that transition looks like. So really want to thank Phil for joining us, and really looking forward to this presentation as well, because I think that this is a topic that, although it's popular and a lot of people talk about it, I think getting into the granularities of it is going to be really neat. So again, thank you very much, Phil, for joining us here, and we'll kick it off to him.
Thank you, Phil.
Well, thank you, Joe and Carla. I'm honored to be invited to speak with you today about financial budgeting as it relates to exit planning and succession planning. I've spent my entire career in the landscape and snow industries as a contractor, consultant, and attorney, and I've seen firsthand how good budgeting processes and financial management practices not only affect business success, but also affect business valuation and succession. We've entered into a period of time that's been referred to as the silver tsunami, with baby boomers exiting their businesses in droves. And I know that some of you are planning to exit your businesses in 2026, either by selling or maybe transferring to children or employees. And some of you are making plans to exit, but maybe not in 2026, but in a future year. And, some of you aren't thinking about succession planning at all, but maybe you should be, because decisions you make today will affect your exit someday in the future. In fact, we always say that the best time to begin planning for your exit is the day you started your business. And the reality is that you will exit your business. It's only a question of when and how. Far too often, business owners exit because of death, divorce, disability, or some other reason that creates a crisis. And it's way better to be prepared with a plan that is dealing with your exit ahead of time, so you're not dealing with it at the worst possible time. So if nothing else, I want to today encourage you to get your succession plan in place in 2026, or start working on it, even if you don't plan to exit until a later year. One of the essential elements of succession planning is to understand how your financial information will be perceived by a potential buyer or during a business valuation process. Financials that are accurate and follow best practices for design and reporting are more defensible, which makes your business more attractive to potential buyers and drives up enterprise value. That's a good thing. This Excel workbook that we're going to be working through today is something I created for this presentation. I'm more than happy to share it with you. So if you're interested in having a copy of it, just shoot me a quick email, phil@tamariskadvisors.com, and I'm always happy to just answer questions or chat with you about things in general. It's just one of my loves in life is to chat with industry peers like you. So feel free to reach out. I've always found that budgeting is easier and more understandable if it's done in Excel. And, every financial professional I think I've ever met in my life would probably agree with that statement. When I'm working with clients, I'm often extracting their budget assumptions from whatever software program they happen to be using, whether it's Aspire, Boss, Synced Up, Service Autopilot, Arbor Gold, or Element, or whatever it is. I'll take their numbers out of those programs and reorganize them into Excel so we can run scenarios, create rolling budgets, and some different tools. And then we can take that budget information, go back into the software. And if someone wants their budget in QuickBooks for reporting purposes, we can do that as well. But budgets are way easier to create and understand in Excel from my experience. So I'm going to briefly walk you through some important budgeting information that relates to succession planning. And we're going to start with gross profit and gross margin. I'm just going to jump to the next tab here in my workbook, this gross profit tab here, and we're going to talk about gross margin. Now, some of you are saying, I don't really know what gross margin means. Well, gross margin is a very important number to focus on. And we're going to start working through an example here with this company that has $10 million of revenue. And just so you can understand what gross margin is, if we start with revenue and we subtract our cost of goods sold, our direct costs, all the things like labor and materials and subcontractors, we arrive at gross profit. So revenue minus cost of goods sold, gross profit. If we divide the gross profit back into the revenue, we get our gross margin. In this example, it's 51.75 gross margin. And then if we continue down our very high level profit and loss statement here, you can see we subtract our overhead from gross margin to get net profit. And if we divide our net profit back into our revenue, we get net margin. Okay, so gross margin is important because it shows how effective your operation is. It shows how productive your factory is. And a potential buyer, is going to care about that number because they're going to compare your gross margin to industry benchmarks or to other deals that they're considering. And so it's really important that we understand our gross margin because it's going to make our financial information more defensible, and the way that we present our information should be nice and clean. And there's a more detailed, thoughtful way that I think would be very helpful. And this is what I want to get into here in this segment initially, about how you're creating your gross profit assumptions and your gross margin assumptions in your budgeting process. Okay. And so moving on here, we start with budget assumptions, and typically we start with revenue. And so in my $10 million hypothetical company here, we have revenue assumptions for these 4 different revenue categories, classes, if you will. And you can see what they are for landscape management, enhancement, snow and ice, and Christmas. And they total up to 10 million. Great. Easy to do. We know we need to start there. We also have to make assumptions about gross margin. And some of you aren't doing this, and this is important because different classes or divisions have different margins. So our landscape management division in our example here has a 50% gross margin. Our enhancements have a higher gross margin percent, 60 in our example. Snow and ice has a margin of 70%, and Christmas decorating has a margin of 80%. Okay, so those are very different margins based on the revenue class. And this is very typical of what's happening in our companies. Sometimes we're just not thinking about this when we're budgeting. We're missing this step. This is an important step. So we're backing our way into our gross profit. Okay. And the other consideration is, how much work do we subcontract, and what's the margin for subcontracted work? So this adds another variable into our planning process. So when we're budgeting, now we not only have to budget for our self-performed work, but we have to budget for our subcontracted work. So if we're going to do this, now we need to think about revenue allocations based on our 4 categories, classes, or divisions. And we have to split up that revenue between how much of that work are we going to do ourselves, self-performance, and subcontracted work. And you can see the budget examples here for the assumptions we're using in our sample budgeting process. Everything, all the revenue adds up to 10 million. It's just broken out by these different categories, okay? 2 variables. Now, we have different gross margin assumptions. For subcontracted work, typically it's lower than our self-performed work. In general, what I see across the industry, a good average subcontracted gross margin is around 30%. It really depends a lot on what we're subcontracting and what our contribution to that is, but let's just say 30% across the board. It might not be the case. This might be different depending on what we're, which class we're in, but we're going to keep the same self-performance gross margin assumptions in our budgeting process, and we're going to use 30% all the way down for our subcontracted. By the way, all these yellow cells here and above, these are input cells. Every other cell that you see here in my spreadsheet that is not yellow is a formula, okay? So going back up here, this first step in my process here is to input our revenue. Second step is to input our gross margin assumptions. And once we do that, this is all formulas, we have our gross profit, which is our revenue times our gross margin. And you can see the numbers here. They all add up to, 5,175,000 gross profit. And you can see here's our composite gross margin, 5175, which is exactly the same as where we started with. But what's nice about this is now we have all of our gross profit assumptions that we need for our budgeting purposes broken out by class and broken out by whether the work is self-performed or subcontracted, okay? Now, this is the key statement right here. A buyer is going to be interested in this level of detail. Without it, the buyer really doesn't have a good understanding of what this business is all about, and neither do the owners, which is a scary thing. So we need to be doing this even if we're not thinking about succession planning. Now, because we know our revenue and because we know our gross profit, we know our cost of goods sold because that's the difference, okay? So revenue minus gross profit equals cost of goods sold. So here's our cost of goods sold, adds up to 4.825. And if we reorganize this information into more of a traditional format, it might make more sense to you. So we start with our revenue at the top. Here's the exact same information, all formulas. We subtract our cost of goods sold, which is, again, all formulas. And then we end up with our gross profit. Okay, and here's our gross margin. We have a blended gross margin for self-performed work at 64.8. We have a gross margin for subcontracted work of 30%. We have a composite gross margin of 51.75. And I just want to reemphasize what I said earlier. If all we knew was this 51.75 number, gross margin overall, we didn't have this detail, we would have no idea what's happening with our business and how successful these different classes are. So this is really important information. Definitely something we need to integrate into our budgeting process. Now, as we start to think about the full budget and we classify all of our financial information, you're going to end up with something that looks like this, okay? And there's different formats. I'm going to actually show you a different way to set this up, but this is just a simple spreadsheet format here where we can look very high level at our revenue by class. So here's our classes up here. Here's our revenue totaling 10 million. All of our cost of goods sold down here, totaling up to 4.825. Here's our gross profit. But we have all this split up by class. Now, earlier, we determined what our revenue is going to be, and we determined the subcontractor portion, but we still need to determine some of the other items for our cost of goods sold. So we still need to input our field labor by class, our materials by class, rentals, and anything else in your cost of goods sold so that we can get a nice clean gross profit by class or by division, okay? So you can see our gross margin here for landscape management, blended is 45% and 52.5 for landscape enhancements, 51.54 for snow and ice, and 80% for Christmas. Now, if we also have to input our overhead, and our overhead are all the other expenses that are not part of our cost of goods sold. And we can do that. We can allocate overhead by a percentage, which is what I've done here, or we can just not allocate overhead at all and just stop allocations by division at gross profit. And we can just have a total overhead number, which is very common for smaller businesses. Some of the overhead allocations get just way too crazy or fictitious, where it's not worth it. They're not defensible numbers. Okay. And in our example here, with our overhead of 3.675, we have a nice clean net profit of 1.5 million at 15%. Okay. But if we were to allocate our overhead, you would see that we would have net profit by division or by class, which is great too. Okay. Now, one more thing on this page here before I move on. I want to talk about this concept of above the line or below the line. You may have heard this phrase before and not knew what it meant. So I'm going to just walk you through it real quick. The line that we're talking about is the gross profit line. So in our industry, there's this debate about where to put our equipment expenses. Whether we put them in our cost of goods sold in our chart of accounts or whether we don't put them in our cost of goods sold. If they're not in cost of goods sold, then they're below the line, they're in our overhead. So let me show you what that looks like. So if we're above the line, our cost of goods sold, our equipment's going to be in our cost of goods sold. So in my example here, I have $1.5 million of equipment expense, 15% of our total revenue, which increases our cost of goods sold and reduces our gross profit. So in this example here, our gross profit shrunk down to 36.75. And then you can see we subtract our overhead to get our net profit, and we're net profit of 15%. Okay, and then if we go up below the line, what's going to happen is our cost of goods sold is going to be less. Our gross profit is going to be more. We're back to the 51.75. Our overhead is going to be more because we have our equipment expenses included in our overhead, but we're still going to hit the same net profit. So this doesn't affect our bottom line. It just affects our gross profit. And this is really important because when a potential buyer is looking at one company versus another and they're trying to compare apples to apples, they're going to want to understand what's in your cost of goods sold. Okay, this also affects the way you run your business. So if we go back up here to, the above the line situation, companies that want to include their equipment expenses in their cost of goods sold, so it'd be above the line. These are typically companies that have significant landscape construction divisions because they want their equipment expenses to be allocated to every single job uniquely. So when they're bidding a job, they're estimating equipment into that job. Whereas companies that think of equipment expenses as overhead typically are companies that have large landscape management divisions where their equipment expenses are just fixed because every truck and trailer has the same package. There's really no difference. They're certainly not estimating specific pieces of equipment in every single job, and they don't want to. So equipment expenses are just overhead. Okay. And again, this is important because if we want to compare apples to apples between different deals, we need to understand what is in the gross profit. We can't just blindly take one company's gross profit and compare it to another company's gross profit. So hopefully there was some information in all of this that was educational for you. I do want to move on, but again, if you have questions, just hit me up. Happy to walk you through this. Next, I want to talk about something called EBITDA or or however you want to say it. And this is a concept that shows up a lot when you're talking about business succession or valuation. EBITDA is just an acronym, and it stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So we know what interest is. That's the interest you pay on your debts. If a company has no debts, they have no interest. Okay. Taxes are tax expense that you pay, and depreciation is your equipment depreciation. And amortization is kind of like depreciation. Think of it that way. It's depreciation for intangible assets. So for example, if your company owned a patent, that's an intangible asset. You would amortize that versus a truck that you would depreciate. Okay. Most companies in our industry don't have amortization expense. So let me walk you through an example. So we're just going to downsize this company here. Now we're down to a $1 million revenue company just for ease of doing the math. We have cost of goods sold of 500,000. So we have a gross profit of 500,000, 50%. And then we have overhead expenses, and including some interest expense, $20,000. We don't have any amortization. We have depreciation of $50,000. So our total overhead is 256. Our net profit is 244, 24%. Pretty nice. Is that doable in our industry? 24%? It is, but this would be an elite company in our industry. There are very few companies that can reliably earn over 20% net profit. There are some, I've worked with some, they're few and far between. Okay, moving on. And then in this hypothetical company, our taxes are $10,000. And if you see in our P&L here, we have our taxes below our net ordinary profit, which is common in chart of accounts. They're in the other category. And the total bottom line net profit is 234 after taxes. Now, what's happening here? We have this P&L, we have $1 million revenue, we have all these expenses, we have a nice net profit. The EBITDA is a way of taking out some of the choices that the owner is going to make, the discretionary choices about how they're running their business, setting those aside so we can compare apples to apples, one company with the next. So what's happening to calculate EBITDA is we're starting with our profit and we're adding back all these expenses that are owner's discretion. Okay, so interest, like I said earlier, if a company doesn't have any debt, they don't have any interest. So we're going to add the interest back in. We're going to add the depreciation back in because depreciation is it can look very different in different companies depending on their strategy and different ways they're taking depreciation. And then taxes can vary greatly as well. So we're adding these expenses back in. In my example here, we have a total of $80,000. So we're adding $80,000 back to our net profit. We're coming up with a total number of 314. That is the EBITDA. Okay, and if we divide that back into the revenue of 1 million, it's 31%. That is the comparable number that buyers are going to be using. So just a quick tutorial there on EBITDA, just so you know what that is. There's another piece to this when buyers are looking at your company. So they're calculating EBITDA to get to that apples to apples number. They're normalizing the cost of goods sold and the gross profit, like we talked about earlier. They're also normalizing other expenses. And let me explain to you what that means. A lot of times you'll hear the phrase owner's benefit. And what's happening here is in our companies, oftentimes we're expensing things that are to our benefit as the owners, and we have the right to do it because of tax laws. There's nothing about this that's illegal or unethical. We're writing off things because we can do it. The laws say we can do it, but the buyer is going to write off things in a different way. So the buyer is not going to continue to pay the benefit that I'm gaining from my company after I sell my company. The buyer is going to treat the company differently. So my benefit that I'm taking from the company needs to get normalized. So let me give you an example here. So let's say in this new hypothetical company, we have two owners, Mary and Joe. Okay, Mary and Joe, they're husband, wife. Mary works in the business 80 hours a week. She's indispensable to the company. And she earns a salary of $75,000. That's what she pays herself. Her and her husband decided they would pay her $75,000. But, on the street, if she went and applied somewhere else with her experience and her contribution to this business, her salary would be $150,000. So she's underpaid by $75,000. If we want to normalize this, we have to increase the expense for her by $75,000. Okay, the opposite with Joe, because Joe isn't really contributing much to the business. He's working 20 hours a week. He's kind of a putzer in my example here, but he's also making $75,000, which makes no sense, but it makes sense for Mary and Joe from a tax perspective. Together, they're making a good living. They're making $150,000, okay, from the business, plus whatever distributions they take out. But Joe is really only worth 25 grand, to the buyer if Joe stuck around. So that's an adjustment of $50,000 the other way. And then on top of that, we have Mary's aunt, Elizabeth, who doesn't work in the business at all, but needed some money. And Mary thought it would be nice to pay her a salary. So Mary's paying her a salary of $25,000 for doing nothing. The buyer obviously isn't going to continue to pay that. So we have an adjustment of $25,000. Similarly, Mary's uncle, Zachariah, also needed some money. He's a putzer too, and he earns a salary of $25,000. The buyer has no use for Zachariah, so that's an adjustment of 25. And then we have John, Mary's nephew, who works as a crew leader in the company, and he's a regular solid employee. He's a great crew leader. He makes a salary of 50. And you know what? There's no adjustment because the 50,000 is normal for his position in his geographic area, so there's no adjustment there. And then we have a few other expenses here, and these are very common things that creep in to company P&Ls, and they need to get normalized from a buyer's perspective. So Mary and Joe's boat payment, the business, the buyer isn't going to pay for Mary and Joe's boat payment anymore. So that's an adjustment of $30,000 in my example here. The company's also paying for Elizabeth and Zachariah's cell phones, $2,400 a year, and their vehicles, $24,000 a year. Elizabeth and Zachariah have a sweetheart deal here, and I see this all the time in companies. Now, there's nothing wrong with it, but a buyer isn't going to pay these expenses, so they have to get added back in. And then we have Joe's toys. Joe likes to buy things that the business doesn't really need, so we have excessive equipment to the tune of about 20 grand a year. So if we add all these adjustments together, that's $101,400 that a buyer that has been expensed from the business. It has reduced the profitability of the business, the net profit. And so maybe intentionally to not pay taxes on a larger number, and that's fine. Again, nothing illegal or immoral here. It's just this is what happens. So a buyer is going to have to normalize this business. They're going to have to add back in $101,000 of expense. Okay. So when we look at valuation, if we're using the earnings multiplier method, which is what I refer to as the napkin method, this can be done very simply on a napkin. There's really not a whole lot of thought that goes into this. This is a mechanical financial process that maybe is a good starting point. There's some value to this methodology for business valuation, but there's certainly a lot missing from this method. But let me just explain it real quick. So if we're going to use this earnings multiplier napkin method, what we're doing is we're taking the EBITDA. So we calculate the EBITDA of 3014. We're adding in the owner's benefit of 101.4. We're getting a total of 415,400. And then we're multiplying that number by some multiplier driven by market forces. And I'm just going to use a multiplier of 3 for simplicity's sake. We get a total valuation of 1.246200. Okay, again, this is only financial driven. There's no other variables going into this. So there's limited value to this number, but it at least gives you a number to work with. There may be some other adjustments for equipment or real estate, but in this example, we just have 1.246. Okay. Now, another financial model for valuing companies is called the discounted cash flow method. And I know Carla's has a big smile on her face right now because this is her jam. This is certainly a more accurate way of valuing a company. And what this ginormous formula here does is it looks at the future free cash flow of the business and it discounts it back into present value dollars. Okay. And the formula is here if you want to play around with it. That's a very accurate model and something we use and look at when I'm valuing businesses. But then what's going to happen is the market is going to come into play. And so there's this market method of valuing companies too. And it's very simply what a buyer's willing to pay. So, a company with really good, strong, defensible financials is going to be worth more. A company that's not distressed is going to be worth more. And then what happens in the negotiation process if there's multiple suitors for the business, interested buyers, there potentially could be a bidding war that drives up the valuation. So the discounted cash flow method and the napkin method get us partially there. but the market is going to take over at some point, and we're going to end up negotiating valuation. Now, one more sheet here in my workbook to talk about, and I want to talk about professional fees. If you're budgeting in 2026, and 2026 is going to be a year where you're going to sell your business and exit, there's going to be some professional fees that you want to budget for. So I just want to talk through this real quick here. Certainly your accountant, you're probably going to pay your accountant more than you normally would because maybe you're doing some cleanup, you're preparing some reporting, maybe you're revising your depreciation schedules, you're cleaning up your capital accounts. So typically your accountant's going to get paid more. Maybe you should budget quite a bit more for your accountant than you normally pay your CPA. If you have a financial advisor you're working with, this is going to be a year where you're probably going to engage them at a higher level to think about wealth management, investment strategies, retirement planning. Estate planning attorneys are going to get involved if you're thinking about estate planning. So, how to reduce taxes. When we sell businesses, we have capital gains tax to think about. There's all kinds of other taxes and wealth transfer considerations. And then just basic estate planning, wills, trusts, powers of attorney, charitable giving, all that kind of stuff. Your business succession advisor, is really your quarterback of your succession planning. They coordinate activity between all the other advisors. We do a ton of this. You certainly want to allocate some money for them. Your business attorney, if you think about your partnership agreements that maybe need to be updated, maybe you don't have a good buy-sell agreement or there needs to be some revisions. As you get closer to the sale, you're going to have asset purchase agreements or stock transfer agreements. Maybe there's real estate involved, so we have deed preparation and things like that. Insurance sometimes comes into play here as we're doing succession planning to protect interests as we get closer to the deal, to make sure that there's money available if we need to protect someone's interest until the deal closes. And then, if you're selling your business through a broker, there's going to be fees for creating market proposals and marketing and handling negotiations and all the things that come with selling a business. So, this probably is not an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good list of things to be thinking about as you're budgeting in 2026 if you're thinking about selling your business. So I'm going to wrap up here, and I just want to say thank you. And again, if you want the spreadsheet, I'm happy to send it to you. I am including in this spreadsheet all of my budget templates, so there's some value here. These are all formula-driven linked sheets, starting with actual input sheets, your budgeting sheet here, a rolling budget, which is all formula-driven, and then all the monthly comparisons, month by month, comparing actuals with budgets on a rolling basis all the way until December. So again, just my gift to you. I wanted to really give you something valuable. If you'd like this, just shoot me a quick email. If you have questions about it, let's talk. I'd love to chat with you. So with that, thank you. God bless. And I'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Phil. That was phenomenal stuff. And yeah, it's important not only for companies, maybe you're looking to, even if you want to hand over the business or, figure out a certain plan when it comes to working with your son or daughter that's going to be taking over the business, or maybe you are the son or daughter and, looking for, a way that you can ultimately run, your parents' business and take it over from there. So thinking about all those different succession plan options, or maybe you want to look out in the marketplace and, figure out what are the best strategies there. Definitely recommend reaching out to Phil, even if you just want that spreadsheet as well. Great resource. But thank you so much, Phil. That was phenomenal stuff. And,
Joe, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. In my screen, it looks like I'm frozen, but yeah, thank you so much, Phil. I found myself geeking out over the discounted cash flow method there. I haven't seen that formula since taking the CPA exam, but we could geek out over that. And but I was chuckling to myself because Joe, I guess you opened up a business with Mary. Who is Mary? But anyways, I think Phil touched on really good subjects. I think when you're looking at building your budget, he mentioned building it by division, by class. So you may have an install division or a maintenance division and want to build out a budget for both, because as Phil said, there are different margins in both. So it's important for you to get that insight. Now, from an accountant perspective, having a year's worth of data of a profit and loss for a division that you're tracking on QuickBooks is ideal. But if you don't have that data, then we can help you put together a profit and loss by division by just analyzing some numbers and making some assumptions and stuff like that. But it's important that you get with whoever is doing your bookkeeping work to make sure that all your transactions that are going through the bank account, revenues, expenses, you have some sort of system that allows you to see the P&L by division, right? Because your accountant or bookkeeper, they're going to need to know if they see a Site 1 expense come through, if they should categorize that for the install or maintenance division, and whether you have like a receipt tracking app or a CRM that allows you to upload receipts or something like that. That's really what's going to be key. And your labor too, you need to know, which person in the field is working in which division, or maybe a time tracking sheet that you have people clock time onto, so that way your accountant or bookkeeper can see which division to code that to. So that way you're able to have clean financials. And we're currently helping some of our clients exit from their business. That has come up a lot this year. And one of the things that comes up a lot is when somebody is looking to sell their business and the buyer is evaluating financials and we're getting lawyers involved, is some of the nuances when you do mix personal with business. Not that you're not going to be able to sell your company, it's just there are more intricacies that come and need to be involved, and then we have to go back and clean up the books if there are some personal items or you're commingling things. But yeah, and that's one of the things that Phil mentioned. And so just making sure that you keep both personal and business separate is important. But thank you so much, Phil, for bringing up those items, and really great stuff.
Very nice. And excited for our next speaker, because we focus a lot of the key drivers of the company, right? And I think a lot of the more exciting aspects of the company. But at the same time, that shouldn't mean that we're not taking a look at some of the less exciting line items within the budget, right? Typically within the overhead side and the administrative expenses and all that's included with that. And that's why we felt it was important to bring in our next speaker, Erica Guggio. She's going to go over cutting costs, not corners. Erica is a cost reduction specialist with Schooley Mitchell, North America's largest independent cost optimization firm. She helps contractors reduce expenses in telecom, merchant services, fuel programs, software, waste services, and more, without altering day-to-day operations. And they're also vendor neutral. So they don't get a kickback from the different vendors and different companies that they ultimately look into, right? And Erica's going to dive into it here further, and but super excited for this. And so I'll hand it over to Erica here.
Hi, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank Joseph and Carla for having me here today. Before we get started, I do have a question for the audience. What if your business is losing thousands of dollars every year, not because of slow sales, but to hidden fees and inefficiencies you didn't even know existed? Well, today in this section of the workshop, we're going to be diving into cutting costs, not corners. I'm going to show you the most common areas of where money is being lost: fleet, disposal, merchant services, telecom, and fuel. I'm going to give you some actionable insights and strategies to stop those leaks and reclaim those dollars back into your business. And it's something where you're going to see it right before your eyes. So let's get started. I'm going to get into how I got into this, savings that you're missing out on, how we do it, those categories I just mentioned, and real results and impacts. So just to give you a brief bio, I'm Erica Jujo. I'm a cost reduction specialist. I came from the marketing world, and one thing I kept seeing over and over again through SMBs, didn't matter what industry, is they thought that marketing is always and the only answer to increasing your revenue. While it does help with that, it's not always the best solution. If you have salespeople on your team that don't pick up the phone, you've got a sales issue. If your processes are need of an update and your systems need of an update because you're spending more time than you should, that's an operational issue. And I kept seeing these issues over and over again. When you have a boat and you want to sail, if you've got some holes in that boat, any marketing that you do, you're not going to be able to start the engine. And one of the things that I do now with this particular firm is I help contractors, trades uncover those hidden expenses. So those leaks in your boat, you're able to get that money back and clog it up. And as I mentioned, from things that are already in front of your eyes: fuel, fleet, your merchant services. What we do is I identify those inefficiencies and negotiate those better rates so you can keep more of what you earn. And if you're not currently reviewing those expenses, you're definitely leaving money on the table. Now, I understand from your perspective, you guys are out in the field every day, working your asses off. And by the time you get home, you want to crack open up a beer and sit in front of the TV, or go to pickleball, or spend time with your family. So I completely get it. It's not always a priority. But today I'm going to show you those things on where to look right away. So we've got those, as I mentioned, we have fuel, waste, ELD, merchant services, and telecom. Let's go. So in order for us to look at all these particular categories, I have 250 people at head office in different categories that sit there all day long with a magnifying glass and look in your vendor contracts to see where you're overspending, or we negotiate those better rates with 3,700 vendors in our stack between the US and Canada to get you those rates that you deserve. Now, some people will say to me, "Hey, Erica, listen, Jim is my cousin, and Jim is in waste disposal, and I can't go to another firm. It's gonna look bad." And the reality is 70% of the time, most of our clients don't change vendors. We will just go to Jim and say, "Hey, listen, Jim, we're gonna be doing an audit. And just so you know, we are gonna be comparing you to quite a few vendors within your category. Sharpen the pencil, give us some better rates." And this way, you keep the peace and you can put that money back into your pocket. The other thing that we notice, not just from a negotiating perspective, but we look to see where certain things are being unused or where there's a duplicate of services. I'll give you an example. You don't know how many times I've seen contractors that have 2 cell phones, or they have a cell phone with 100 gigs of data. Why do you need 100 gigs of data? Do you know how long it takes to get through 100 gigs of data? They ended up just sharing it with their family and friends. You don't need that for your business. You need savings back into your pocket. And the last thing that we do, and one of the great things about working with us, is when we provide these audits, if you don't save, there's no fee. And regardless, you get a free audit anyway. So 80% of the time, we are going to find something. And when we do find something, it's on average between 26,000 to 100K that goes back into your business every single year. Now, let's talk about our first category. So fuel. On average, you're going to save between 8 to 20% on the fuel costs. If you have 5-10 trucks and you're doing over $10,000 a month, one of the biggest things that we shift from, if you don't already have it, is fuel cards. Fuel cards can be used for trucks, mowers, and your equipment. Those are some big expenses there. When you have those fuel cards, you can save an average of 10% or 10 cents on your fuel. Now, the reason why is when you have these fuel cards, it's not just with one particular Shell brand, for example, or Esso, or any sort of petrol in the US. You get a pool of them all together. So it doesn't matter where they are, up north, south, east, west, they can take advantage of quite a few locations. Where another big savings comes in, and why you see 20% here, is we uncover a couple of different things. We have truck drivers and people in HVAC and quite a few construction and trades where when you get a bill, how many times have you seen snacks on it? Or how many times have you looked at it and said, hang on a second, this truck takes X amount of liters or X amount of gallons. Where did the gas go? Time and time again, with those fuel cards, you're able to track those liters and those gallons that are going into each and every truck. It's not just about idling that particular vehicle, but we end up finding out that gas doesn't evaporate as much as you think it does. People do sift it out. And I'm not saying that every company, you have employees sifting it out, but we do see it more than you think, and they do get caught. Let's move on to disposal. So recently, we've actually seen over $16,000 in savings between ELD, telecom, and waste. Now, where we see some big savings is incorrect and duplicate billing. So sometimes you'll actually be charged for bins or pickups that aren't being used, or you're paying for services multiple times. Another big problem, and this is actually also for seasonal waste as well. Another big problem is you've got these oversized containers that you're using larger dumpsters than you actually need, which significantly increases those monthly expenses. To pay attention to your dumpster size and what you're actually putting into the dumpster. Another thing is, and I mentioned this a little bit, but is unnecessary pickup frequency. So when you're paying more for frequent pickups than the job actually requires, think about that. With waste, and I don't want to quote The Sopranos, but I'm going to quote The Sopranos here. There's a lot of hidden surcharges. They'll start with one price, and then 2 or 3 months later, it's another price. Look for those hidden fees. Compare your first invoice to your third invoice. Look at the fuel surcharges, your environmental fees, or late fees. Oftentimes, those are hidden and not monitored, and that's how they get you. The other thing that you're going to want to look at, and what we look at, is your vendor contracts. So there's always room to negotiate. Compare alternative haulers. Look for missing opportunities in the cost reduction. And last but not least, another big thing is recycling and disposal mix-ups. So sometimes you're actually paying higher rates for trash that could be recycled. Think about that. Or diverted at a lower cost. I know in the US, they put everything all in one. look at what you're actually disposing, because you can get money back from that. These are just a few items from the disposal category, but just by looking at these, you can save on average 40% in your waste. Another big thing that we did recently was actually for ELD and fleet tracking. It's not just about GPS, but for pest control, we actually did $5,000 a year in various wireless devices, saving, and includes fleet tracking devices, and on top of other significant waste and payment processing. So if you've got unused or unutilized subscriptions, and this happens in ELD a lot, you're paying for devices or licenses that a number of trucks or drivers are actually using. So if you go from 10 trucks to 5 trucks, go back to the negotiating table. The other thing that we notice as well is a lot of people are paying double because they've got some overlapping features or models. So some ELD providers bundle additional features such as safety reporting or weather tracking, and maybe you don't need those extra things per month. Or maybe you have, I know in Canada, our stolen vehicles and theft has gone up 300%. If you have certain tracking advices, count what's doing what. And I see this quite frequently over and over again as of recently. And again, look to see within your contract where you're locked in and where you can actually negotiate those higher rates. Now with ELD, this can also be combined with telecom as well. So sometimes people will separate it, but often it's better to put it together. And also with this another particular client, a landscaping client actually, we were able to save them 15% on their ELD services. Now, this one, landscaping contractors and my construction folks, you may not use this a lot. It is still a cash-driven industry, but merchant fees, if I can get you $17,000 back into your business from merchant fees, your credit card machines, do it. They take so much money from all of us. Where it comes from, sometimes it's the people that have the credit cards with points. Who pays for the points? You guys as the merchants. 2 to 4% of revenue is actually lost to processing fees. What you're going to want to pay attention to, PCI compliance, security fees. Sometimes they're charged redundantly or without need. Look at your interchange fees. Look at the markup. Sometimes you're overpaying due to the lack of transparency and how processors actually mark up fees. As I mentioned, with certain types of credit cards, if someone uses a black credit card, you're paying for that, not them. They're just collecting the points. You also want to be looking at batch or settlement fees. Sometimes multiple small charges can add up either daily or weekly transactions. And the other big thing, the biggest one, is you want to look at your monthly gateways and your multiple POS terminals or your gateways that are charging or overlapping fees. So if I could put $17,000 just for merchants fees back into your business, it's a win. Last but not least, we're going to be looking at telecom. Telecom is huge. Recently, we saved a construction company over $26,000. Where they're seeing a lot of savings here is not just from the dollar amount, but it's being misused. For example, you don't need 2 cell phones. You could use 1 cell phone with a VoIP line. Now, depending on where your service area is, you do need to pay attention to the service and the towers. So sometimes VoIP is not always the best option, but 1 phone, 2 plans, that's a 50% savings right there. And that's an inactive line. The other thing I'm seeing quite often is you've got these overpriced plans where people are paying, and as I mentioned in the beginning, 100 gigs of data. You don't need that. You need a phone, call in, call out, maybe even sometimes a walkie-talkie service. That's it. Audit every line. Negotiate your contracts. By the way, there's ways to break it. And that's where we come in. And don't be afraid to optimize those bundles. As I mentioned, when you're optimizing, let's say telecom and your ELD, of course, at the end of the day, you're going to get a better deal. So these are just some examples from people and construction companies that we've worked with throughout the year. So a landscaping client, we were able to save over $10,000 over a variety and multiple of services, $26,000 in telecom, 40% in waste. A roofing company, we did $50K across the board, and merchant services are a no-brainer. There's 99% a way that we can retweak it. What I'm trying to get at here is every dollar saved can be reinvested into your crews, your equipment, and your business growth. You guys work harder than everyone else. You're not in a cushy office with air conditioning. You're outside digging. It's hot. Depending on the winter, it's cold. You have to do the grunt work. When you get home, let this work for you. It's not about cutting corners, as I mentioned from the beginning. It is about getting every dollar reclaimed to strengthen your business. And as I mentioned right from the beginning, people think it's about marketing. Sometimes it's not about marketing. It's about strengthening those cores, patching those gaps so that you can keep sailing. And as I mentioned, we're contingency based. No savings, no fee. But everyone here that signed up today, if you do get in contact with me, I'm going to give you a free audit if you qualify within the certain parameters that we have within the firm. Keep growing, smarter, leaner, and stronger. Here's some contact information if you'd like to get in contact with me, and I'd be happy to point you in the right direction and get you the money back that you deserve.
Great stuff. And and like I said in the beginning, it's one of those things that you may not put a big priority into, but that's why, and this goes with a lot of administrative services, being able to lean on someone like Erica and her team of 250 analysts to really dig into some of these vendors and expenses and try to reduce those, especially if you look at the potential enterprise value that can be saved on that. If they can save you $10,000, $20,000 a year, and if your company sells at a 3 or 4 multiple of profits, you can kind of imagine it could be tens of thousands, even into over the 6-figure range in regard to potential value. So I definitely recommend reaching out to Erica and her team. Her email's in the chat as well, and the website. But just want to thank Erica so much for joining. That was great stuff. And, also want to thank her. I know she works with a lot of contractors and everything that she does for the industry.
Thank you, Erica. That's awesome. And as part of our cleanup, and just looking at even our budget, Joe, the other day I was looking at all the subscriptions we have for the different softwares, and I noticed that, so for some softwares we needed to decrease some of the seats, some of the users, right? Because it's per user that you're paying per month. And before I used to just be, not to hate on the softwares, because, a lot of them are amazing and we couldn't do the work that we do without it. But before I used to just be able to go in and edit the amount of users and bring down the cost because some things change or whatever. But now for all of them that I went in and I tried to adjust the users, making sure we have the right budgeted number for subscriptions and stuff. I wasn't able to. I had to reach out to a direct point of contact at that company to adjust the users, and even found that one of them upgraded our subscription without, really a lot of notice and stuff like that. So just, some things that I noticed within our budget that we could find some cost savings on. And I'm sure a lot of you probably feel the same way with some of these subscriptions and things like that.
Yeah, and just to kind of dive deeper as well, not just looking at the actual transactions, but their team actually reaches out to these vendors and negotiates better rates as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of opportunity, especially when you look at all the overhead line items. So again, I definitely recommend reaching out to Erica. I know she does great work over there. So, and I guess, one of the other overhead items, more from an ROI perspective, something that you can really invest into is marketing, right? And that's why we have our next speaker here. Super excited. Ron McCabe's joining us. He's going to go over the SEO foundation and budgeting for your landscaping business. Ron is not only an awesome guy, but he's also the founder of Everbearing Services, and he's an internationally recognized digital marketing and SEO expert, serving the horticulture and green industry. His team supports landscapers, arborists, garden centers, and horticultural suppliers with SEO, PPC, e-commerce, social media, and content marketing strategies tailored to their niche. So he has decades of experience, even involvement in certain industry associations and education efforts. And again, just want to thank Ron, very much in regard to joining us here. And I think marketing is one of those things that companies don't take advantage of enough. So I'm going to kick it off here to Ron, and thank you, Ron, for joining.
Thank you, Ron.
Hi, I'm Ron McCabe with Everbearing Services. Here to talk to you a little bit about SEO and the process you need to go through, as well as how to budget for it. Obviously, I'm highly biased, but SEO, in my opinion, is the foundation for your marketing and online lead generation. Your Google business profile is your complete foundation, like that's the most important thing and what you should do first. And then your SEO optimized website, and then ongoing SEO activities. Related to that is answer engine optimization, or optimizing for ChatGPT, Claude, or any of the other numerous AIs out there. It's all about structuring data for both SEO and AEO. You need to have clear, structured information. First thing you need to do when you're just starting out, and really when you're starting to actively market online, you need to focus on your Google business profile. You should create the Google business profile even before you do your website. It's that important. You want to clearly define your primary and secondary categories to define what you do. You want to complete your profile with service areas, hours, photos of your work, and business info. And you want to regularly add services as you expand, and fill out your frequently asked questions. Those are great for your customers, but they also drive the answer engines. And you want to complete your details early, and you want to update them often. You want to build the Google business profile out with photos. If you even add 20 to 30 photos, it's going to update and improve your visibility by 200 to 300%. You want to really highlight your service and service areas. I know it sounds crazy, but people want to see pictures of your team, your equipment, and your job site. And you want to fill out those FAQs, and that's going to support your local search and AEO. When you're just starting out, kind of the minimum setup for your new or small company is going to be your Google business profile. I do that before anything else. You also want to set up, and a lot of people don't even know to do this, you want to set up Bing Places. And that's kind of the Google business profile, or the local business profile for the search engines that are not Google. So that's Bing, that's DuckDuckGo, and it's others. And, at a bare minimum, when you're starting, you want to have just a single one-page website that just has your name, address, phone number, and services. And you do want to expand on that, but just to get started, that's a good way to go. You also should really have a CRM of some sort to capture those leads and follow them up. I'd start that at the very beginning. And I'd focus on reviews and building up your Google business profile activity. That's going to start your credibility. For everyone in this audience, reviews, a quick tip is you want to look at your competitors who you aspire to compete with and do better than, and look at their reviews. And although you're probably not going to be there overnight, if you steadily work towards that number, that's a really good way to kind of keep yourself on a positive path. And that's really going to help you as you grow. You want to also have your website structured properly as you grow and expand your website. So you want to build out individual pages for each service. You want to avoid grouping those services together. You want to use clear headings and structure your content. One thing I tell my copywriters is write an outline with the headings of what you're going to talk about on the page, as well as your bullet points. The reason I do that is consumers, as well as the engines, look at those bullet points. They kind of scan the information, and then consumers will then read the actual text if they're interested in the highlights. So that's just a kind of a quick tip. You want to have that structured. By doing that structure also, it helps the answer engine see what's on the page. You want to, throughout the site, include frequently asked questions, and up to 40% of your online search weight, your weighting towards search, is geographic relevance. So your location references are very important. You want to add high quality images and have a clean, easy to read page layout. AEO tools pull from clear, simple, organized content. So that's why they really like FAQs. And you want to have concise sections throughout your site, kind of summarizing things to improve your visibility. Schema markup or structured data helps algorithms and AEOs understand your services. It helps it understand relevance. So, for example, it's not just a retaining wall, it might be a structured, recycled concrete retaining wall. Kind of those fine points and understanding the relationships is what schema helps you do. You also want to think about your content in terms of conversions. If content is well structured, consumers can read it more easily. And so you get a benefit in that, if a consumer can scan the page and see what they need to find right away, they're more likely to ask for your services. Once you're going, you want to do regular Google Business Profile updates, request and respond to reviews, create regular Google posts, and maintain your name, address, and phone number, or NAP, throughout your web and web experiences. SEO activity improves results for your local service ads when you go to advertise. As you grow, you're going to want to start doing social media. And social media does help drive your local online visibility. It sends social media signals or SEO signals to let the search engines know you're doing it. If you're going to do social media, first of all, I don't recommend you do it until you're ready. But when you're ready, you want to be consistent. So if you're going to do it once a week, do it once a week. If you can do it 3 times a week, just consistently do that. But you want to just have a regular rhythm to how you do it to be the most effective. So this seminar is about budgets and just some quick guidelines. If you're under $1 million, probably not what you want to hear, but you're going to want to invest 10 to 15% of your revenue on marketing for meaningful growth. Initially focus on the Google Business Profile and reviews, and then building out your initial website. As you get over $1 million, you really should be more 5 to 15%. The more growth-focused companies are going to be in that 10 to 15% range. If you want just kind of a slower growth, a 5 to 10% range is okay. And by then, you should have, fully built out SEO website and AEO content. You want ongoing optimization happening with, discrete and distinct service pages and reviews. And then once you're over 2 million, you want to really have more of an omnipresence approach. And so you want to be on the appropriate social media platforms for your market. Like if you're a commercial, LinkedIn is your platform. If you're consumer, you're looking at more Facebook and Instagram. And a third that a lot of people don't do that I really like for SEO is Pinterest. And somewhere between 1 and 2 million in revenue, you want to start engaging Google Ads. Also, if you are building out a large commercial base or consumers, you want to engage with the newsletter, and you want to think about who your client is and how you engage with them in your sales process and structure your online activities around that. Well, I hope this was a good overview of how to budget for SEO and kind of the activities that you need to budget for. Feel free to reach out to me. Again, I'm Ron at Everbearing Services, and hope this was helpful to you.
Thank you, Ron, for joining us. That was great stuff. I mean, marketing is such a essential piece to the whole puzzle. Making sure, going back to our conversation before in regard to hitting those revenue targets. So, Ron, thank you. Thanks again. That was some great points. Definitely some great highlights there. So. And also shares information in the chat as well. So definitely reach out there, his website. And also, I also shared the schedule as well for today and tomorrow. I mean, really today we're going to close it out with one more speaker, and it's Alex Guzman. He's going to cover the 5 pillars of a profitable contracting business. And Alex operates Landscaping Experts Incorporated, a multi-million-dollar landscape company based in Joliet, Illinois, and leads the modern-day contractor community, where he helps hundreds of contractors improve sales and operations. And, really, really want to thank Alex for joining us for this, and I'll let him take it from here.
What's going on, guys? This is Alex from Landscaping Experts, also owner of Modern Day Contractor. So when it all started, I was a contractor, just like you guys watching. It all started with me, my mom, my dad, in a dream. I took over when I was about 15 years old. And from there, obviously we progressed, but very slow until I got in front of the right information. We fast forward. By the age of 27, I was able to retire my parents, retire myself out of the field, being able to bring my wife into the business. But the real reason why I'm here is because I want to teach you guys exactly how I learned how to keep the money instead of just watching it disappear. So when the team asked me to talk about the P&L sheet, I said, you know what? Let's talk about the stuff that actually moves the needle for us. Real changes that actually help to stop leaking our profit. All right. So number 1, cut all emotional spending. When I talk about cutting emotional spending, like I said, it can mean something totally different for you guys, but at least it gives you an idea of what you can do to help your business. So for us, it came down to, before making a decision, big or small, we had to be data driven. Let's say when I went to go buy a piece of equipment, or our guys asked us for an attachment for that piece of equipment, instead of just immediately saying yes because we had the funds or because we had the runway, we had a lot of projects or whatever it was, I went back and checked to say, you know what, how much productivity am I going to gain by buying this piece of equipment? How many years is it actually going to take me for this equipment to pay back for itself? A lot of times, some of this equipment that I'm buying, or some of these attachments that I'm buying for this equipment, it equals out to the same thing as your guys doing it. If numbers don't add up, if you're not really saving anything, if you're not really moving the needle or helping your business in any kind of way, be more efficient, be more profitable, don't make that purchase. Yes, we do have to make some decisions in our business that are going to be based on what we think is best, but 90% of the time it should be data driven. I highly suggest that any decision you make within your business, whether it's big or small, make sure it's a data driven decision. All right, number 2, job costing. So if you're not keeping track of exactly how much money you're making on every job, I can promise you, you're probably not making any profit, or if you are, you're making very little. So that was another thing that for us, we had to implement and stay really tight on, because it goes back to emotion, right? On paper, data has to show us that we made the amount of money that we think we made. I do mentor quite a bit of contractors all over the United States, and it's typically the same answer I get when I ask them, hey, how much are you making on this job? Well, I think I profited 30%. That's one thing that we had to really implement and really stay tight on, is making sure, whether it's on paper or whether it's on, on a software that you're using like Jobber, it doesn't matter what it is. You need to have a clear picture of how much money you collected from that job and how much money went out. If you don't have a software that can do that for you, do it on pen and paper. It doesn't matter. Put in the amount that you received, and every single day, collect your receipts, put them in a folder. At the end of the day, go type it into that spreadsheet, and it's going to tell you exactly how much money you're making. That way, at the end of this job, you go look at how much money you think you made, and realize, hey, you know what? I actually didn't make the 30% that I was shooting for. Now we can go back in real time and correct those estimates that were given out. Not wait until the end of the year and figure out that we're negative again. That's a big mistake that we made for the longest, and I don't want you guys to make the same mistake. All right, number 3, tracking your overhead and also implementing this into your estimates. Some contractors don't even know about overhead. If you're not job costing, if you're not job tracking, you're probably not making the amount of money you think you're making. Not also just implementing overhead into our estimates, but also making sure that you continue to update your overhead at least every quarter, right? Because remember, if you buy a truck, you add more people to your office staff, whatever the case may be, I can promise you your overhead is constantly changing. Maybe we remove some people, maybe we optimize our operations, whatever the case may be, but I promise you your overhead is constantly changing, whether it's going up or whether it's going down. We need to change that within our estimates. Once you figure that out, break that down. If you work 200 hours out of the year, go ahead and break that down into 200 hours that you work. That way you can tack that on into your man-hour rate that you're charging for your estimates. Because if you think you make 30% gross profit, you're probably not making anything, or you're barely making anything. So if you don't know, you're not adding overhead to your estimates, don't make the same mistake I did, and go ahead and figure that out. All right, number 4, having a clear payment structure for all of your jobs. So what do I mean by that? Like I said, for us, once we started paying attention to our P&L sheet and how it was affected, that's when we realized we had to not only change all the other things we just talked about, but also changing how you collect your payments, what type of milestones you set for every job you have open, or even when you give out your estimates. Let's say we have a $50,000 job, right? Making sure that you're always ahead on collecting payments. You're not falling behind with your cash flow, because remember, that also will affect your P&L sheet. The way we personally do it is we ask for 30% of the job when you sign. We ask for another 20% right before we arrive, so that way, by the time we arrive on site, we have a 50% in our account. And if it's a project that, let's say 50 grand, right? Halfway through the project, or about, let's say 60, 70%, right? A little bit over halfway, we will ask for another 40%. That last 10% is when it's done, right? Let's say you have 5 of these jobs open. If you collect only 50% up front and the 50% at the end, you have a lot of money floating around, because remember, by the time that you finish this job and you get paid, you probably started another one. So you have all this money going out before it all comes in. There's times where you have 3 jobs that you can't close out because there's something very small that's holding you back. And then you might still have 50% being held up at that job, other jobs. So you have 3 jobs with 50% remaining. That was one of the biggest things that helped us with our cash flow, but also it helped our P&L sheet look a little better. And if your P&L sheet looks better, that means your business is in a better place. And also another thing is making sure that you have a proper process for you to continue to collect these payments on time and not fall behind. Because if you fall behind a few days, a week, and collecting payments, in the long run, it's going to affect you. I'm just giving you guys an idea of what works for us. And remember, I've been in the game 19 years and I've tweaked that multiple times. So whatever works for you guys, the only thing I recommend is just don't do the typical 50-50 at the end, because one, that's not going to work for you and probably not even the customer either, because we need to set those milestones to where they make sense to you. And at the same time, they are fair to the customer, because by the time you collect those milestones, that part of the work is already done. You know, if you're more than halfway done with the job and you still have 50%, it's not fair to you for the customer to hold 50%. If you don't have a clear payment process right now, I would definitely look into modifying it if you're always short on cash. And also, like I said, that is going to make your P&L sheet look a lot better. But I hope that helps you guys. Number 5, making time to go over this data with your accounting team. Going over this data is just life-changing for you and your business. I will say that, especially in the contracting business, I'm here to tell you, it is the most important part of your business. Because if your numbers don't make sense, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter how hard you work, doesn't matter how many people you employ, because at the end of the day, you're running to a dead end. Even the people you employ, like I said, they won't have a job for a long time. So it's one of the biggest things, like I said, is I want to leave you guys with is make sure that you make time to go over this data with your accounting team. If it's possible, get the services that, they offer here with CFO services. They're very, very helpful. That way you can set up your monthly meetings. I will tell you, that changed the game. Seeing those numbers real life every month to month, and being able to project what we're going to change next month, game changer. If you just wait until the end of the season, end of the quarter, it's fine. I get it. Depending on your size, I get it. That works. But if you wait till, maybe I'm the only one that did it, but I do a lot of contractors that do this. They wait until the end of the season and then find out they were probably estimating wrong this whole time, or they didn't job cost, so they don't know if they profit or anything on the jobs. But all they know is that they were negative. And then it's one more year that went down the drain. Prioritize your numbers. Meet with your accounting team every single month if possible. Good or bad. I know it's boring stuff for us because we like to be out in the field, whatever the case may be, and we don't want to sit in front of a computer, look at your numbers. But I promise you, you're going to thank yourself at the end of the year when you do this, because at the end of the month, when you see things didn't go right, or if they went well, then we just replicate the same thing we did last month. But if they went wrong, then we need to figure out, okay, what are the things that we need to fix in order for things to go the right direction? Even if the first month that you track, the numbers are bad, they're down. But if the next month we make a few changes and we're trending up, doesn't mean we're going to be in the green the next month right away. But as long as we're trending up, it might take 4, 5, 6 months. As long as you see every month that you're trending up and not down or staying the same, you're going to be in a different place. So please make time for your numbers, and I hope all this information was helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. That was great stuff. And I love the point in regard to progress payments. I think oftentimes customers in the green industry, I think they might have more of a pushback on the total price. But because they don't get projects done all the time, they don't maybe know what was normal and what is industry standard for the progress payments in regard to, taking 30%, 50% up front, or, being able to set that apart. And that can have a huge impact on cash flow. And even in regard to Alex's point with trying to go over the financials throughout the year instead of at year end. That way you could be a lot more proactive with things. Just want to thank Alex again. And, I would definitely recommend following Alex on Instagram, which I'll put in the chat, what his Instagram is right now. And, like I said, he works with hundreds of contractors and runs a great business as well. And so today we covered specific line items within overhead, marketing, potentially those of you that are looking to exit your company, right? So a lot of those different items. And tomorrow we have another great lineup of speakers as well. And everything from insurance to recruiting and onboarding to software expense to leasing, so some more great stuff It's going to be starting at 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow as well. And I really do recommend reaching out to the speakers as well. And similar to like even when Carla and I think about Cycle CPA, and as I look at different events, even within the accounting industry, I try to look at different resources and coaches and different people that have already done what I want to accomplish, right? And I think even if you don't end up opting into the service, right? I think it's great to look into different things and having those introductory calls, because oftentimes it can give you insight. A prime example is, I know Phil Harwood, spoke about exiting, right? Even if that's not something you're looking to get into now, I think, really trying to be exposed to just how you should approach that situation, right? So I definitely recommend looking into, and speaking with as many of the speakers as possible. And, I just want to thank all of them again, because, I think it's phenomenal, how they're really kind of, just investing their time and, out of their busy schedule to be able to add value here. And if there's anything that, everybody wants to see in regard to tomorrow, feel free to email me as well. But I really, really hope everybody got value from today. It was great to be able to see a lot of familiar names in the chat, and, really thank everyone for joining.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. And I just want to also make sure that you're giving yourselves a pat on the back, coming on this webinar for these few hours. It's not easy, but you're taking the right step forward and, planning for your business and planning for next year and just educating yourself. And thank you so much for being such a great audience and collaborating in the chat. Had a lot of fun today, and I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow. So have a nice rest of your day. Bye.
Bye, everybody.